Welcome, everybody, to the U.S. Chess Tournament of State Champions. We're going to be looking at the Denker, the Haring, and the Senior Championships. I'm joined by Jennifer Shahadi, a good friend of mine, and a great force in U.S. chess. Jennifer, I'm so happy that we could have the call today.
I am so excited about these events, Robert. We've got the Denker Tournament of High School Champions, the Ruth Haring Tournament of Girls State Champions, and the Senior kicking off today. And these are some of my favorite events, Robert. I mean, of course, usually they're played live. We're doing them online this year. And uh, one of the great things about that is the participation lists are incredible.
They certainly are. We started off with the Weird Entry Blitz events yesterday. That was a lot of fun for the participants. A nice, easy way to get the ball rolling for these tournaments. And now it comes the more traditional chess, the classical chess, longer time controls as we get into the Denker tournament, the Haring, and the Senior. So as you can see here, grades 9 through 12 for the Denker, girls K-12 for the Ruth Haring. Unfortunately, the late Ruth Haring is no longer with us, but she was so instrumental to so many important changes within U.S. chess and did so much. We really miss her dearly. And the National Tournament of State Senior State Champions is great for those who have been playing for a long time, veterans of the chess scene, some people who have participated in U.S. championships and the like. So it's really great to see those players who may be coaching some of the younger players. It's really fun for the students to see their coaches play as well.
Oh yeah, I think the events trio this today is just going to be fantastic. And yeah, those prizes are so important right now. You know, a lot of the kids are using them for college money, and yeah, it's an incredible event, and I'm really excited to get the round underway. I mean, we've got some really heavy hitters in these events, right, Robert? I mean, the top seed of the Denker, Nicholas Cheka. We've also got Carissa Yip in there, Jennifer Yu and Annie Wang and the girls.
If,
Big names.
if they thought that this was going to be an easy payday, of course they're mistaken because there's great competition towards the top for these prizes. The Denker, the Haring, the younger participants will be given the award in scholarships, I believe, for college. And there's the Ursula Foster Awards, and I want to make special mention of those because Ursula Foster was actually classmates with Anne Frank and was specifically mentioned in the Diary of Anne Frank. And she survived the Holocaust. She ended up loving the game of chess. Her family decided to give back after she passed away. And that's what those $500 awards you see on the rightmost columns are. One for the Denker, one for the Haring, for participants in those. And that's really great for the Foster family to give back to the chess community. We're so grateful for that. And what a life story she had.
Incredible. And shout out to my friend Richard Schifrin, along with his wife Barbara, who are sponsoring the prizes in the Haring tournament and have been doing so for the last 4 years. Really just great to see this continued support from so many.
Indeed. And we will have a very full 2 weekends ahead. We start today, that's July 25th, as far as I'm aware. And we have the 3 games from the Denker and Haring, 1 game from the Senior. Tomorrow will be 3 more Denker and Haring games and 2 Senior games. The Senior have a bit of a longer time control, 90 minutes with a 10-second increment versus the 70 minutes and 10-second increment for the youngsters. So the youth will play many games this weekend, and that actually can help produce upsets, right? People get tired, they play several rounds, and then they're exhausted by round 3 in that day, and upsets do happen, especially with underrated youth.
Absolutely, Robert. We will definitely see upsets. 3 games in one day. It's a lot of chess, but it is online chess and there will be breaks. But yeah, I definitely predict. I think the first round, there are a lot of lopsided pairings. So here's a question. Do you think there are going to be any upset victories as early as round 1? Because we've got big rating differentials. I think it's about 600 points in each tournament.
I think we will. But speaking of long tournaments, long days ahead, we're going to take a quick break before the action begins so that we can be ready for the games to take off. Stay tuned, everybody. We will be right back. And as we return, we do have liftoff in the Denker and Haring tournament. I have in front of us the game from board one of the Denker, but Jennifer, I'm happy to go wherever you decide is best for us and our viewers. Here we see a French defense with Nico Checa taking the black pieces, and he is playing somebody who is, well, 550 points lower, Nathaniel Moore. That doesn't mean that an upset is impossible. It just means that it will be difficult with that rating gap. So, Jennifer, the ship is yours to steer. Let me know what you want to talk about. Any game. There's so many of them. Happy to go wherever.
Well, let's start with the opening in this game, Robert, as Nicholas Checa is our top seed in the event. And yeah, let's just see how that went down.
Okay, well, we have a French defense, my least favorite opening. And the reason why is this bishop on c8 often struggles. So you're creating a pawn structure that does a disservice to one of your pieces from move one. However, it is regarded as a very solid opening. If you put engines on and they play each other, they often play the French. So Jennifer, maybe I'm a little too harsh about the French.
I don't know. You're not going to get much disagreement with me. It's like an echo chamber, Robert, as the French is also one of my least favorite openings, both to play with his black and to defend against with white. Yeah. Wait, so those of you who want attacking, but it can be difficult. Even Bobby Fischer had problems with the French, resorting to the King's Indian attack, which can't really be the best theoretically, but he just felt stylistically was one of his favorites.
Yeah, I mean, G3, D3, Bishop G2, all this stuff is the King's Indian. It just doesn't create the same challenge in the center as you see in some of the other variations. But in this game, we saw the Tarrasch with knight to D2. And that move, the knight on C3 puts pressure on the D5 square. The knight on D2 simply protects the pawn. And it allows for white to play C3 in some lines. So for instance, if black had played knight f6, after E5, knight D7, this is very thematic in the French, and there's often a knight on C3. But the knight being on D2 allows white to play C3, F4, knight F3, and sort of expand very naturally and have a good pawn chain. Pawns like to be protected by other pawns. In this game,
and you even sometimes do something really weird when you play the Tarrasch, but maybe we can explain why as you move it forward a few moves.
Okay, let's go to the game. C5.
So they played the C5 variation. Yeah, I was just going to say that in the variations you were showing, sometimes bizarrely enough, the knight on D2 goes to F3, and then the knight on G1 goes to E2 to really protect that D4 square.
Exactly, like this. One knight to F3, one to E2, make sure that D4 is very safe and sound, because black often plays C5, queen B6, knight C6, and puts all of the pressure on white's center. So instead, we saw the C5 direct variation saying, I'm going to attack your center immediately because your knight's on D2 rather than on C3. So it's a little more vulnerable. And that's why you see these trades happen where white captures both pawns in the center. The queen is out early. So for some of our less experienced viewers and our younger viewers in particular, this is an opening where as a grandmaster playing with the black pieces, he knows his opening theory. It's okay to bring the queen out here because it had direct purpose. A pawn was captured in the center, and the queen captured that pawn back. But you have to be very careful, right, Jennifer, about bringing the queen out too soon?
Yeah, especially when it can get easily attacked. But this is the thing in chess, oftentimes there's this natural flow. And by putting the knight on D2, you made a slightly awkward decision with your knight for very concrete purposes. And then black capitalizes on that by getting the chance to centralize the queen because it's not as easy to attack it. Bishop C4 might come in later, but for the moment, the G2 pawn would hang.
Right, exactly. And it's a great point that we tell people not to develop the queen too early because it can be attacked. But if it can't be attacked, like it cannot here, you play C4, well, thank you for your D4 pawn. Right? That's a free one. Yummy, yummy. I'm going to steal that one. So the queen is actually okay for the time being. And after D takes C5, black went knight F6, knight F3, and queen take on C5. So that would probably be a very strange move to most. Like bishop can capture on C5, but instead, black is capturing with the queen. So it's about rerouting this queen, as we saw Nico do in the game. It's actually best illustrated by what he played, and he's good with his opening theory. He took with the queen on c5, and after knight to b3, dropped his queen to c7, saying, I know it looks like white has one move ahead in development, but black's position has no real risk here. After bishop b5 check, I can simply block your check. There are no weaknesses to exploit just yet. So I'm okay bringing my queen back towards my pieces, back on c7, the seventh rank, rather than keeping it out in the center where it could be a bit vulnerable and may allow white to attack pieces that are behind it.
Well, Robert, why don't we take a look at the herrings board one, as it looks like that one might not go on that long, as
Okay,
there's
and
all
I forget which one is a happy pawn or happy farmer. Both of them are such strong players that I don't remember whose board won.
a happy farmer. That is Annie Wang, international master, and also the reigning world Pan American Junior champion, and that's for both boys and girls. So she is an incredible champion, is Annie, and I think unfortunately for her opponent, it is Annie's move right here,
Ooh.
and that D pawn is ripe for the taking.
I think this is a really instructive opening. So we'll breeze through the first four moves, let's say, because those were very natural. C4 playing the Queen's Gambit, declined. Knight to C3, take on D5, and Bishop G5. So already putting pressure on this knight, pinning it to the Queen to put pressure on the D5 square. And Black played the very natural Bishop E7. Good move, blocking the pin. White went E3, and here's where mistakes happen for players who may not be so familiar with openings. Bishop F5 is not the worst move to play in the grand scheme of things, like with an engine's assistance. But the issue is after queen to b3, now there's a double attack on b7 and d5. So putting your bishop out to f5 actually allowed this double attack to happen. So Jennifer, it isn't the worst thing to lose a b7 pawn for players who are more experienced and can get quick counterplay. But that term, counterplay, compensation, it's often very vague. And that's why Black went for the queen c8 move instead of playing knight b to d7. So how can you explain, how to improve our openings and maybe to be a little more solid so we don't have to worry about double attacks?
Well, the thing is, Bishop F5, it's such a natural move, and I really wish we could play it here because then I'd play this opening as Black too, Robert.
Yep.
But life is not that easy because of these double attacks and the potential queen b3 moves. It's very difficult to get our light squared bishop out so quickly in this game. And I think, how you improve that is it's important to look at, like, my guess is the white player in this game, I don't know this for sure, but my guess would be that she's an e4 player, and that therefore she doesn't sympathize or relate as much to white's plans. So that I think is key. You got to understand why your opponent is doing what they're doing. And it's not so that you can just develop all your pieces in castle and equalize easily for Black. Nope, Annie is going for it, and she has captured that pawn on d5.
Yeah, it's both these pawns being under attack. Black went for the direct approach of protecting on b7. Knight b to d7 is actually an acceptable position for Black. It's really hard for our newer players and those in the audience who's like, wait, doesn't that still give away a free pawn? And that's why I'm saying compensation is such a vague term. Like after queen takes b7, Black can play rook to b8, giving up the a7 pawn for the b2 pawn. You're like, wait, white just stole two pawns for the price of one, but Black has all this activity. So in fact, white would not have been able to so easily grab this pawn on a7, b7, then a7, because Black has great compensation. And I keep saying it's a vague term. So in order to avoid getting into these kind of vague concepts, instead of bishop to f5, I would recommend maybe the more solid move like castles, or even in like c6. It's a little bit passive for some, but that way your pieces are very protected and you don't have to worry about these double attacks. But in the game, after queen c8, bishop f6, knight takes d5, Annie Wang is too strong not to find this little combination to steal a pawn and have a dominant position.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be really tough. And I promised you, Robert, that I would explain why she's called a happy farmer.
Oh, yes. I almost forgot to ask. Why is she the happy farmer?
Well, because when she signed up for, and I'm probably going to repeat this story later because it's too good, but when she was very young and signed up for chess.com, she really loved Jolly Ranchers. And unfortunately, that handle was taken. So she used the synonyms happy and farmer. It was the closest thing to Jolly Rancher.
That is an amazing story. Like I'm not even saying that facetiously. That is a great story and a great reason to have the user.
I think, and she told me that actually, I asked her why her name was, usually I don't even ask questions like that. I interviewed her recently for Ladies Night because oftentimes the answer is going to be not that interesting. That's like, thank God I asked her that.
That is a fantastic story. It's like, well, what's your favorite candy? It's the Happy Farmer. You never heard of that? Oh, Jolly Rancher. Got it. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And so I see people in chat asking about the second seed. It is Jennifer Yu. Annie Wang is higher rated than Jennifer Yu. Jennifer Yu is our 2018. Well, I guess technically, wait, no, 2019, excuse me, 2019 U.S. Women's Champion. And that makes her the reigning champion because there has not been a 2020 version just yet. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic has not made over the board play possible. And so Jennifer Yu, and we'll pull up her game now. I think that makes sense since we're talking about her. She has the black pieces in this game, and she is a happy pawn. So off air, I asked Jennifer, is there a reason why one's the happy farmer, happy pawn? I don't think that they're connected in any way, but they are friends. So I was wondering if there was some overlap with usernames.
I don't think so. I don't think there's any, what would it, excited bishop type candies or something, or excited knight. No, or excited foot soldier. what kind of candy would that be? No, I think a happy pawn is just a really great handle, and it is very genuine. It's very genuine. But how is she doing in her game? I saw that she played this perk defense, right, to kick things off. An opening that Genu tends to play when she feels like she wants to win. By the way, a lot of these ratings look a little weird.
Yeah,
that's because these players haven't played necessarily a lot of rapid games online or classical length time games online, so they're a little bit deflated. I think for their opponents a lot too, because looking at the pairing list, I think Jen was playing like a 1600 and she's only got an 1100 rating here, but usually that's just because they haven't gotten enough games in.
And I'm putting the list of pairings from the Senior, the Denker, and the Haring. Pairing, that's a hard one to say, a tongue twister. I'm putting them in my chat here so people can look at the pairings and see their actual U.S. chess rating. So yes, Jennifer is of course much higher rated than 2083. It is her online rating. They are playing online. And you said something is very Gen U. And I will say that this opening is very much her style. And I had the honor, the privilege of coaching her on the 2018 U.S. Women's Olympiad team. And she really doesn't like strict opening theory. She much prefers to mix it up at the early stages, get some creative play, and then try to outmaneuver her opponents. So let's start from the very early stage of this game with e4, g6. We have this modern Peertz type of opening, knight f3, bishop d7, d4, d6. So what Black has done is conceded space. White has d4 and e4 pawns, has more control over the center, more advanced control. And Black is sort of waiting to strike back. So it is a very Jennifer Yu opening. And well, Jennifer, let me ask you. Wow, that was not meant to be like Jennifer Yu to Jennifer, let me ask you, but that's how it came out. Now I'm stream of conscious speaking here. But when you have played these positions before, doesn't it frustrate you that you feel like for White, you should be punishing Black's kind of odd going against some of the chess principles opening play, and yet it never is that easy?
It isn't, and that is exactly why Jennifer Yu plays this against lower rated players, because she wants to keep it crazy and interesting and imbalanced, and often White overpresses. Even this move d5 that was played is not a move I usually like to play when I've got the center, unless I've got a really nice follow-up. Mm-hmm. It's very committal, and it creates two problems. The one problem is that bishop on g7 now has beautiful scope. And the other one is that the light squared bishop now on e2 has less potential. And I can't ever play e5, or I rarely can play e5 with the same punch that I might get if I had my pawn still on d4. So yeah, I don't like this move d5.
Yeah, it's such a tempting move to play, right? You see that you're attacking a knight, you're gaining what seems like more control, but looks can be deceiving. While you are advancing your pawn and taking away c6 and e6 from Black's pieces, as Jennifer, you first pointed out, that bishop on g7 gains the entire length of the diagonal, and your bishop for White is over here on h4 and cannot compete with this bishop on g7. So that's a really frustrating thing for White to deal with in the long term, because actually, as we see now, knight b8, queen to d3, and c5 played by Jennifer, it's like, well, please take me en passant. And for those of you who may be newer to chess, en passant is only available on this turn, because if you could capture the pawn had it moved one square, as it only can move two on its first time moving, now you can capture it as if it had moved once and take on c6. And the problem with taking it en passant here is while it's a legal move, then black just takes back and we get into a Sicilian-like position where this bishop on g7 is a monster. The open c file can be useful for a black rook. And so I think that Jennifer is perfectly happy transitioning opening structures.
Yeah, definitely really well played by Jen, and kind of shows how why she played this line in the first place. By the way, G4 just played by white here. What do you make of that move? Gotta love the spirit. Not sure I love the move, but I love the spirit.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, way to be brave. You're playing somebody who's, let me look at the rating here. It is, so Skylar Sue, she is 1663, and Jennifer Yu is 2397. That is a tremendous rating gap of over 730 points. And she says, I'm not afraid of you. I'm going to play G4, and I'm going to try to march forward. And actually, this is somewhat scary. It looks like you're just, kind of doing too much too early. Your king's in the center. But if white can eventually play g5, perhaps even next move, and you have to take with this pawn on h6, take on g5, you're opening up some files for the potential of white's rooks. And so that's what I like about white's position. What I don't like is everything you said before, Jennifer, the bishop on g7 in particular, and the fact that the white king is not going to have an easy time castling. If you castle queenside, you're walking into an attack, and black is certainly going to punch through a move like b4, queen a5, and just launch what looks like a vicious initiative.
Yeah, agreed. I think that this is a really spirited move, but castling queenside, unfortunately, Jen just has such a head start on her attack because those pawns on b5 and c5 are very well positioned. And, white also has this move a3, which will serve as a hook for Jen to explode everything. So I get why white is trying to do this, but I don't think she's going to be fast enough. And yeah, Jen just commonly played the move knight to d7. And I do think white's going to do castle queenside. And I will say this about it. The thing I like about the way that white is playing is when you're playing a higher rated player, this is a good way to play in general, to mix it up, make it crazy. Because it's kind of like the opposite of the way, like think about somebody like Magnus Carlsen who wants to make the game as long as possible because the more moves the game is, the longer it is, the more likely it is for the better player to win, right?
Right.
So if you kind of make the stakes of each move higher and make an average shorter game length, there will be more upsets. So castling queenside and just kind of throwing everything in the fire, good strategy against a higher rated player.
I certainly agree. And at this moment, I think Jennifer will take a decently long think here because the move g5 for black is one of those really moves that you think, wait, can I get away with this? Or am I asking for trouble? And I think you're asking for too much trouble. So you're like, okay, wait a second. There could be a piece sacrifice there. If not for a sacrifice, the bishop can drop to g3 and white can play h4. So that's just a good lesson that anytime you move pawns in front of your king, you're creating what's called a hook. Jennifer was referencing this before. So that white can play g5 and use this h6 pawn as a hook to rip open the g file. And black on the other side of the board can play b4 using the fact that pawns on a3 as a hook to open up the queen side if white's king castles that way. So I think that Jennifer will continue here. Instead of touching anything on the king side, I know white will probably play g5 soon. That's why the queen came to e3 to put another piece towards that flank. Knight to b6 to open up the bishop on c8 makes sense. But I'm starting to really look at this move g5 and think, Jennifer, there's some real attacking chances here. And I don't know. I don't know how happy Jennifer Yu is despite her username.
Yeah, happy pawns. Well, yeah, I think she would prefer to have that pawn on h7. That pawn is less than happy. Again, it also creates a hook. You really want that pristine pawn structure when the kings are on opposite sides, right? You want h7, g6, f7, just as white would prefer to have that pawn back in a2. Right. So attacking chances for both sides, but I'm still really feeling like black's position is stronger because it's easier to explode things. Like I just think I need more moves as white to try to get a real serious attack going.
That's true, because even this g5 move, and if you take with the knight on g5 and you still have to castle, put a rook on g1, you can just tell by my tone, it takes several moves, drags out a little bit. Whereas if white castles queenside, b4 comes in, just one simple move, and you're already breaking open the queen side. So I think it's going to be quite a tough battle going forward. Jennifer Yu down 11 minutes, I guess, on the clock. 12 minutes is right. And that is interesting to note because her opponent is rated 1660 and she's 2400. And yet it is White who is out to a big lead on the clock, plenty of time left in this kind of time controls. But still, important to look at that and say maybe Jennifer's not so comfortable here.
Now, we should probably take a look at the defending champions game. Martha, a wise pawn, Samarashvili. She did win last year's edition in Orlando. And she is, I think her opponent is playing really well, actually. Martha played, if you've already switched to that game, Martha played this Bishop B5 Sicilian against Knight C6, the Rossalimo. You guys, if you followed the World Championship match between Fabiano and Magnus, you are well acquainted with this variation. And despite being very outrated, Black seemed to be really well prepared for it, Robert.
She certainly does. She plays G6 so she can develop her bishop, just like we saw in the last game we were looking at. Bishop on a long diagonal, White castled, the bishop came out, and knight to f6. So it's a move that allows White's next move with tempo, e5, but you're not so afraid of e5 as it does allow the Black knight to dance in the center. And the knight continues to dance. Knight c3, I don't want to trade you and allow you to take with the d pawn, open up your dark square bishop, back to c7, hitting your bishop on b5. So it looks like, as you were saying, Jennifer, the opening theory is known by the art master queen. Maybe we should call the theory master queen here. And knight to e4, knight to e6, protecting this pawn on c5. The knight on e6 also covers the g5 square. It's a really important defensive piece. Knights are great defenders. And d3, castles, and h4. I actually really like that move. I don't know if it actually amounts to anything, but it does look cool and sort of, you're saying anytime there's a feed kettled pawn structure, I'm playing h4 and maybe h5 to chisel at it. But Jennifer, what's your initial take when looking at the defending champion's position?
I like it. I do like it, but I just think it looks like a game between two master players so far. So I like that. Like we see a lot of the other games that the higher rated player is already off to like a nice lead, for instance, definitely in Annie's case and to a lesser extent Jen's case. Whereas this one just still seems very tense. And as Black, how do you meet an attack on the wing? Well, you want to fight back in the center. So I certainly would love to be able to play a move like d6 here, try to open lines in the center as our opponent is making very clear they're trying to just play h5 and attack us.
Yeah, going forward in the center for Black to counter White's kingside attack, it's a very instructive point because oftentimes we think that if our opponent's attacking us, we need to play on that side of the board. But sometimes the best defense is an offense in a different part of the board because it distracts our opponent's pieces. And so, for instance, the move d5 already attacks this knight on e4. You don't want to give up that piece. And where's that knight even going to, actually? Jennifer, where would you put it? Because I don't really want to retreat it. Knight to g3 does make sense. So is that where you'd go? To g3?
Yeah, because I want to keep more. Yeah, knight g3 seems good. I mean, it is supporting my idea of playing for h5. So I dig it.
Yeah, h5, I shouldn't be so worried about it. And I know that, right? The experience in me says, all right, h5 is just one pawn coming my way. And then I'm like, well, it's starting to make me feel a little iffy because if you get h5 in, then I imagine your dark square bishop will get developed. Probably not the end of the world. And the reason why I'm waffling here is because I'm thinking, should Black play h5 to prevent that pawn's jump? Or should I just say, it's okay. White can play h5. I don't mind it too much. That's one of the essential questions here for Black.
Always the huge question. I'm inclined not to play h5 because one of the things with that pawn on e5 is that sometimes I get to play the move f6. Once I've played h5, the move f6 is just off the menu. It's done.
Right. Because the g6 square and the light squares become a little more vulnerable. So I mean, f6 is possible right away. And then I'm like, wait, what happens then after h5? Has this benefited White? Has it benefited Black? I think it's a mixed bag, honestly. It's going to be who plays better going forward. But I'm already looking at some pressure on the g6 square, eventual knight to h4 type of move. And Black has the bishop pair, though. And maybe the attack isn't nearly as strong as at first glance it may appear to be.
Yeah, this is going to be a really good one, though. I have high hopes for this game. Do you want to switch back to the Denker and look at some of the games on that in that field?
Let's do it because I actually see a game is finished.
Ooh.
the game between Robert Schlatenko, who is a very strong player from California. He has won his game with the white pieces in 16 moves. So, oh my gosh. And his first move of the game was A3. I can't show this anymore, Jennifer. This is bad for all the students watching. Anyone who is learning chess, A3 is not a good first move.
Are you sure? I mean, didn't Tony Miles once win against Karpov with A6?
It's important to know your chess history, so I won't downplay that. However, it's one of those things where even Tony Miles would likely say, do as I say, not as I do. Because A3, it's not that bad, right? It's not a blunder. It doesn't really do anything so bad from White's point of view, but it's not playing in the center of the board. And why do you want to play in the center of the board? In the center of the board, your pieces have more squares. Look at the knight on G1. It only hits from G1 3 squares, where from F3, it hits 8 squares. So your pieces just have more opportunities in the center, which is why we tend to not play moves like A3 in the first move. But let's not give a lecture. Let's see how this went. D5, knight F3, E3. Okay, so then it sort of transitioned to something seemingly normal, kind of like, these ready structures.
But yeah, and I'm thinking like if black plays D4, it's going to be a reverse Benoni. So that's kind of fun because I actually don't hate the Benoni. It's black, and if I get an extra tempo, hey, we're in there because A3 is certainly a useful move in the Benoni. So anyway,
no, you're absolutely right. It's because White moves first that you can transpose to certain openings, and it's not that bad. And you're right, we'll transpose to Benoni, and D4 was played, and then White went B4 very quickly. So I think, let me ask you, Jennifer, do you think this is a one-off opening choice against a much lower-rated player?
Yes. I'm going to go with yes.
And that is with no disrespect meant towards the opponent. Actually, I think players often do this. And that's even at the grandmaster level against other grandmasters. They play something one time for shock value, and then it's thrown away, right? You've covered many games, whether it's the Sinkfield Cup, the U.S. Championships, whatever it may be. Players do this from time to time where they just say, I am going to use this as a one-game weapon and then not remember it and just get away, like go away from that forever.
Absolutely. And that's why like this elite level preparation, not that we're seeing that in these tournaments, we're seeing great preparation, but I think you were also referring to like Sinkfield Cup and Grand Chess Tour. It's so difficult and time consuming because a lot of their weapons are one and done. So they have to store up a lot of them to make sure that if they're playing for a world championship match or even a Grand Chess Tour event, they need to really be packed with ideas as a lot of them expire after one use.
Certainly do. And this isn't the worst thing ever. I don't want to be overly harsh on White's opening play. It just isn't typical. It allows Black some control of the center, but the move B6 played here, it's not a bad move, but it is very reactionary. It's saying my pawn on C5 was under attack. I trusted my opponent that if I take on B4 and try to win a pawn, that probably will backfire. So I do think the rating factor played a big psychological role at this point, because oftentimes, actually, Black doesn't even mind giving up this pawn on C5. So for instance, if you play knight F6 and White tries to steal this pawn on C5, Black plays E5. This pawn on C5 is a goner because my bishop on F8 will capture it next. And look at Black's great center control here with all this development. This is a way to play against this. Instead of react to move B4, you say, I am going to continue my natural plan of action, and then I'm going to expand, and you are going to regret playing moves like A3 and B4.
And I see another game finished. In the I think this is in the girls tournament. EMC 24 has beaten Dehydrated Water. Oh, that's quite a handle. Dehydrated Water. I kind of like that. But let's see. Dehydrated Water is Alexis Williams of South Carolina, and EMC 24 is that one would be Emma Chang. Emma Chang, actually, she is a 1900 player from Ohio, and she was just in the girls club classes that we do every week. We actually have 2 classes a week, Robert, for just to kind of keep the continuity of all the work we're doing for women in chess. Normally we have these girls clubs rooms live events, but we're doing them all on Zoom now. And Emma was at a lecture with Katerina Nemkova, and it was a really difficult position that Katerina set up, a Gary Kasparov position, and Emma solved it instantly. It was a very difficult one. Yeah. So I'm excited to see her here, and maybe once she starts playing against the top guns, she could be one of my favorites to make an upset.
Well, she certainly upset her opponent, not by rating, but by final position, because I see a checkmate on the board. And I'm just going to quickly scroll through how this happened here. It was d6 played in the second move, a Philidor defense. And that is protecting this pawn on e5, but you can do the same thing by moving your knight out first. I'm not going to criticize these players' openings too much because I don't know what they work on with their coaches. It's a matter of style. It's a matter of taste. And every single player is a unique individual who may dislike an opening that I like or may like an opening that I dislike. So bishop b5 check, c6, bishop a4. And black played bishop d7. So that move, I would say, doesn't have an explicit purpose. The bishop doesn't need to come to d7. It's just sort of sitting there. The pawn on c6 was under attack. So I would just say that bishop d7 is a move that you probably could have done without. Maybe play knight f6 or something of the sort, right, Jennifer? It's just, just to develop some of the other pieces.
Yeah, it sounds like especially those pieces by that allow you to castle soon, right? Mm-hmm. Those ones often get precedence.
Exactly, to get the king to shelter, because as we saw the final position, the king wasn't very safe. Let's see how that happened. Bishop b7, castles, knight f6, rook e1, protecting this e4 pawn so that you can play d4 and break open the center. There is a king in the center. b5 and queen to b6. So I understand why black was playing the way she did. It just feels like it's a bit too risky with your king stuck in the center. I mean, she's developing her queen side and going for an initiative with the king in the center, though, as we'll quickly see. Here came c3, here came d4, and then the pawn on e5 was under attack and actually just lost. But this is a big problem for black. Because you push your pieces all the way over the queen side, if you take on d4, it's a way of protecting the pawn by capturing. Then comes e5, ripping open the position with this black king stuck on e8. That's no fun either. Just tough.
Yeah, nicely done by Emma. By the way, I'm looking over on the top boards of the Denker. One player we haven't looked in yet, who I know has a lot of fans here on chess.com, is International Master Carissa Yet, who is one of the top seeds in the Denker, and she is currently playing white against a Shahadi favorite opening, the Scandinavian.
Okay, we've got a Team Scandi position here. And, well, I know that if Greg were here, he would say, no, never play the Scandinavian. But the Scandinavian does have the benefit of having a very solid structure. Pawn on f7 protects the pawn on e6. Pawn on b7 protects the pawn on c6. So white's light square bishop often does not have a great diagonal to work with. So even if white captures this bishop on g6, it's not the end of the world for black, because the remaining pawns limit the scope of the enemy light square bishop. So that's something that I think is important to note. Although white has more space, white is pretty fully developed, the king will be completely safe. So white has to be preferred. It's just one of those positions where it's aesthetically pleasing, but how to actually move forward is a difficult question.
Yeah, knight h4, bishop g6, c3, and Chris is really taking her time in this game, showing a lot of respect for her opponent, not trying to be overconfident just because she's much higher rated. I really like that. I think that's a very important skill that lots of strong players share.
Yeah, and she's playing against Quinn Hudson, and he is rated, I just saw this and I forgot, 2052 in terms of US chess. So that's a player, one of those ratings where you're like, wait, is this person underrated? Have they just not been playing very much? You never really know. And I think it's important to respect your opponent at all times. Because if you are 2000, you are 2050, you may play like a 2450, and then the next day play like a 1650. So because your rating is sort of a mathematical average of your performances, it doesn't really dictate how you will play in a given game. And so that's why I think it is extremely important to simply play the board and not to play the person that is sitting at the board against you.
I totally agree, Robert. And I think the difficulty is the type of people who have that type of respect for their opponents, even when they're lower rated, a lot of the time have so much respect for higher rated players that it can kind of get them into time pressure. So that's why chess psychology is so difficult. You have to both respect lower rated players, but also don't respect higher rated players that much. And that duality is not easy to reach.
It certainly is not. And we've been playing chess for a long time, Jennifer. We know we fall victim to this too. We play a low rated player, we're like, we have to win. But chess isn't about having to win, it's about having to find the best move. And when we play someone higher, we may get into a complex position and we say, wait a second, in this variation, there is a draw by repetition. Maybe I should do that. Whereas if we were playing somebody who was our rating or low rated, we say, wait a second, wait. Let me store that draw in my back pocket and look for more. So we fall victim to the very same things that we're here speaking out against. So I don't want to pretend like I'm this perfect human, perfect player. Of course not. But it is important to try your best to forget that your opponent has the rating next to their name that they do. In any single game, something upsets, they can happen.
That's totally right, Robert. And I think sometimes it has a more subtle you see it in more subtle ways than just like avoiding trying to go for a draw or avoiding a draw. Sometimes it just comes like your opponent makes like a weird move and you tank for 20 minutes against a higher rated player thinking that maybe there's like some reason they're playing that. And then you get into time pressure later and end up losing, right? Whereas if it was a player of your own level, you would just like, think for 2 minutes and play the most natural, well-calculated reply. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that psychology can impair like your chances to show the best version of yourself. And that's a really, I think, important part of chess. So in this position, Carissa back on move after knight to d7. What do you like here for her? I feel like, obviously you could just castle, or you could play a move like queen f3. Like, what would you do?
I like queen f3. I like castling. This is the problem I have in positions like this. I like too many different moves, and I burn clock unnecessarily. And that's not to say that you shouldn't think about your moves, but Carissa is now down nearing 15 minutes on the clock. Plenty of time left. There is a 10-second increment in these games, but I have this problem myself where I'm like, queen f3 looks really good. It keeps the knight stuck on d7 for the time being. It may allow me to castle queenside. Then I'm like, wait, do I really want to castle queenside or should I castle kingside? And if I castle kingside, am I going to play a move like a4 eventually? And if I'm going to play a4 eventually, should I do that now? So Jennifer, I just walked you through some of my own stream of consciousness thoughts here, and I don't have a concrete answer. And with that being said, I'd probably just castle kingside and get it over with, so I don't have to torture myself trying to come up with the perfect response instead of coming up with a move I know is good and that I can continue after that.
Exactly. I think that's well said, because castling queenside is just not going to happen. Technically it's legal. And there are I think there's a legend that Yasser Sarawan was already 2,200 and asked the TD, hey, can I castle queenside here? Or maybe it wasn't Yasser. There was a legendary chess player who was wondering about that. Just double checking with the arbiter. You can play queen f3 and castle queenside, but it's not just about whether you can. It's do you want to? And I think the answer here would be no, because it would really give black a lot of unnecessary play.
Right, for sure. And queen f3 was played. So step one in this decision has happened, and now it remains to be seen. Well, will we get the unnecessary castle queenside, or is queen f3 just played to freeze black's knight for the time being, make black decide, hey, am I going to castle queenside, or is that actually a potential problem? Because if black castles queenside and white castles kingside, then maybe there's a4, a5, b4, things like this. And white's attack does feel like it gets off the ground much more quickly.
Yes, and that's a cool thing about queen f3. Bishop f4 is also in the air. And I think we are actually going to be setting up for a special guest, Robert. So we're going to take a quick break and come right back.
Okay, well, we are excited to have a special interview your way, as Jennifer said. So stay tuned, everybody. We will be back shortly. and we come back for a party that I wasn't quite invited to because the virtual background party looks excellent here. I'm a little jealous. Maybe I can get that set up a bit later, but we are joined by Carol Meyer. Thank you so much. You are the executive director of US Chess. Can you tell us a little bit about, what went through going to make these tournaments happen? Like, what was the process like, and how excited are you to see these unfold?
Oh, so thanks, Robert, and thanks, Jen, for being with us and broadcasting for the events. So, as you might imagine, moving things from a over-the-board environment to online in just about a month's time has been, a large task, and it would never have happened without the work of our invitationals committee taking such strong ownership, the US chess staff, as well as the tournament directors who started their work well in advance of the actual events happening. And, it's really been gratifying and remarkable to see it all come together at the 11th hour. And we're grateful to chess.com for providing such a great platform for our players to play on, and for hosting the stream on their channel today. It's, everything just it feels like such a great partnership with all the people who are involved in these events this weekend, and of course next weekend as well.
And there's an incredible roster of players in the tournaments. I mean, we even have our reigning U.S. women's champion, Jennifer Yu, in the mix. So, can you give us some insight into how you feel about these incredible playing fields?
So, yeah, I think about the invitationals as one of the greatest things that U.S. Chess does. And the reason I say that is it really brings together the top players from every single state. And within that, I'm sure we have some underdogs who are going to challenge for top spots. And, this field is super talented. I know we have at least one GM playing in the Denker. And as you mentioned, we have Jen Yu playing in the Haring. It's amazing how much youth talent we have in the U.S. Right now, and that's only growing. We are becoming stronger in our youth ranks. But I also don't want to just focus on the scholastic events going on this weekend. Of course, we have the seniors playing as well, and there's some great talents joining us as well there. And I think these events are just such a great representation of chess throughout the United States, and all that it has to offer to people who love the game.
Yeah, and that'll be starting in that'll be starting in 10 minutes, actually, Robert, round one of the seniors.
Yep.
It will. And I actually have a difficult question for you. Probably one's going to catch you off guard. Well, there's the Denker, there's the Haring, and then there's the Senior. When are we going to get a namesake for that tournament? And, well, are there any calls for suggestions?
So I'm actually unable to answer that question, but trust me, that will come out in due course at an appropriate time sometime in the future. We are actually working on that, just not at liberty to say anything about it at this point.
Totally understood. I just figured, I would ask the question. Maybe the people want the answer, but I really appreciate you answering anyway. And how has it been with an uncertain timeline of when over-the-board tournaments come back? Because, of course, some local events are happening, but with bigger events, the U.S. Open was canceled. The U.S. Championships was undetermined when or if that will take place in the year 2020. What has that been like for the U.S. chess board? Because it's a very difficult time with some very big questions.
Yeah, so we feel like we have been playing catch up since the pandemic hit in earnest in the United States. And we're hoping that in the early fall, we can catch our breath and really do some additional contingency planning to consider what happens if we're not able to return in the coming months to over-the-board play in the way that we're accustomed. And really, I think it's a matter of scale. And the board has been trying to keep people playing. It's important for us as an organization, one, that people stay engaged with chess because that's what keeps the organization relevant. but it's also what helps us pay the bills. So when we have events, whether they're online or over the board, that drives membership, which also drives how we operate this organization. So the board has been all over it. Really proud to work with such a great group of people who are so committed to making chess such a visible and sustainable activity for all ages. And I'll tell you what, a shout out to every single one of our board members for being there for me and for our staff team during these really, really uncertain times.
Now, Carol, there's also really exciting times for chess, as the issue of Chess Life that's going to come out any day now, in about a week, celebrates Twitch chess, the PogChamps, and this kind of boom that we see in chess. Can you speak to that and how amazing it's going to be when we combine that with the return to over the board chess?
Yeah, so I think Jen, that's a great question. So I think U.S. chess has sort of ambled along for quite a while. We've rated online games for a really long time, but I don't think the organization ever fully embraced it in the way we've really been forced to at this point in time. And so if you look for silver linings when a crisis happens, forcing us to grow what we consider to be competitive chess and opportunities to play, we are definitely making some pivots as an organization to better support and embrace chess in all its forms. So yeah, Jen, the celebration of Twitch and some top streamers who are really putting chess on the map during these days, but also I think for me, this is a little bit of a generational comment, but Twitch is something that I now actually once a week maybe get on and watch something, whether it's chess or something else. But we're exposing all different kinds of people from all different parts of the country and world, as well as across all age groups, to new opportunities to be engaged with the game, whether it's as a player or an observer, or just someone who's consuming entertainment. And I think that had not really been something we were able to benefit from in the past.
Yeah, it's great to see. Obviously, it's a very, very difficult time, so I don't want to sugarcoat anything. I wish that this pandemic hadn't happened, but for the chess world, it has created a lot of great opportunities. And the partnerships with chess.com, in addition to this event, of course, there's a partnership with Chess Kid, the US Chess Elementary Championships that's coming up pretty soon online as well, in the first week of August, I believe.
Yeah, I think to my reading of the popularity is that there's a real thirst for people to continue to compete, and whether it's over the board or online, people just want to compete. What I think we do lose, though, is this sense of community, which I think the over the board game really provides to people. And I know I miss the many friends and colleagues that I have come to enjoy spending time with when we wind up at tournaments together. So, I don't know that we can replace that type of community online. There's an approximation of it, but I'm looking forward to also getting back to events when it's safe to do so, and seeing all my friends and colleagues.
That is going to be a great party indeed. I'm sure we're going to appreciate it more than ever when we get to all break bread together. And till then, these partnerships and this ability to connect on Twitch and online and watch amazing chess is so appreciated. I think we're gonna go to a quick break, Robert, right, and then come back with the seniors, but we also want to let you know that we welcome any donations today to support the United States Chess Federation. You can make a tax-deductible donation, and those are extremely welcome right now, right, Carol?
Absolutely. You know, U.S. chess historically has operated on membership revenue, and that continues to be true today. Our last fiscal year, which just ended the end of May, we actually had a banner year for fundraising. And what those funds do is it allows us to develop programs that are non-traditional for this organization. And one such program is our women's program, which Jen, of course, is the director of. And we get grants and other donations to allow her to run programs for girls and women throughout the year, as well as re-grant some funds to U.S. chess affiliates throughout the country to run local programs for girls and women. And we definitely couldn't do that without the generous support of organizations like the St. Louis Chess Club and others who have supported our women's program activities.
Well, Carol, it's certainly true. And we also couldn't do much of what has been accomplished without the likes of you. So we want to thank you personally for your contributions. I know you're very modest. We, of course, have had plenty of time to interact over the years, but I do want to send a personal thanks to you because you do so much for the organization, for helping chess grow and for helping the U.S. chess community.
Thank you, Robert.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here. We are going to take a short break, and when we return, we will have the senior tournament of champions added to the Denker and the Haring. We will be back shortly, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
as we return here, we get back to the action. The senior has just taken off. We have the Denker and the Haring and the slower time control in the senior section that has 6 grandmasters and a number of other title players. So that tournament is very, very strong. Jennifer, I'm starting with this game that we have here because I was in the chat. Somebody was saying, hey, my friend's playing. Can you look at his game? And so we do have the game here between Christopher Shen and Tin Wen. And Christopher Shen with the black pieces. It says 2139. This is online chess.com rating, but in US chess rating is 2424. Very strong player. And I see a Meraxi bind. I typically do not like black's position in the Meraxi bind. Jennifer, it's all about getting this move d5 in, though it's white's turn in this position.
Right. It's white's turn here, and you're saying that he needs to stop this move d5.
It's one of the big ideas. I don't know if you have to be stopping it right now because your pawn on c4 is doing a good job with this rook on c1. I just know that that's what black is always aiming for. Whether you can get that to happen is another question.
The thing is, I play d5 right now, because if it was black's move and I played d5 and you take and recapture and pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5, rook takes c7, looks like it's going to turn out well for white.
Right.
But so maybe really what we need to do is move as black. We need to figure out a way to perhaps move the queen away from c7, but then b6 will hang.
Yeah. So we know what the central theme is. I just don't know how black is going to accomplish it. And actually, now that you mentioned the b6 pawn, is there a way, does white want to sacrifice a knight either on d6 right away or on e6 first, and then win in exchange back? So you're essentially getting a rook and 2 pawns for 2 minor pieces with the move order knight takes e6, f takes e6, bishop takes b6, hitting the queen and behind it the rook. Or alternatively, you could take in a different order, knight b6, and after queen b6, then play knight takes e6, hitting this queen and also hitting this rook as well. So is tactics in the air here for white. And this is one of those upsets. We talked about there could be some. If this kind of tactical arrangement happens, it feels like white is the one who comes out ahead.
I do like the knight e6 variation even better, because I like that after queen c6 or something, just removing your queen from capture, knight takes d8, rook takes d8, that it's pretty much impossible to get to move d5 in. And that will make it impossible for you to unbottle some of your energy of your pieces, both the bishop on b7, the bishop on f8, and the rook on d8. It should theoretically be good for black if he has a way to kind of get his minor pieces to dance, but I don't see it.
Nope. This is a dance where you're sitting on the sidelines watching everybody else have fun, because those minor pieces, as you said, they're bottled up. They don't have room to work with. And that's the really big thing. And knight e2 was played instead, which attacks the pawn on b6 directly and forces black to move a knight to d7 to defend. And I still like white's position, but it was a really interesting tactical moment. And I guess, in part, playing a high-rated opponent, you don't want to make those big decisions. And that's where psychology comes into the game of chess rather than just objectivity.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is so much psychology, even with online chess. Perhaps a little bit less online because you don't have the potential intimidation of your opponent, right? So to me, it seems like it might be a little bit more person versus person in the level and the skill that you bring. It's basically like the psychology against yourself, not as much against your opponent. But let's take a look. Speaking of psychology, because there's always so much of that when you have these big rating differentials. I'm looking at Jen Yu's game, which we had checked in on earlier, and she looks like she's doing really well, but she's actually used quite a lot of time. But should be okay. As let's see, what's the material count here? 5 pawns to 6, but on top of that pawn on h6 is more of a weakness than a strength.
Very true. Very, very true. The king blockades it. If the rook ever moves from h1, it will be scooped up. And so it's already up a pawn. That one is weak. Black can play maybe d5 and try to go d4, just march these pawns in the center. It feels like a great position for Jennifer, who is a happy pawn up. So it's looking like she is doing well, spending her time wisely. Sometimes, coaches say to their students, why did you spend so much time here? Like, you could have conserved your time better. But there is 10-second increment in this format, and she's ahead by a pawn. So the position is so good that it clearly validates her decision to spend all this time to get to this point.
Earlier, I was joking about how in the game with Carissa Yip in the Denker, that she wasn't going to castle queenside because the queenside castles opened up the possibility for black to attack. Well, I was dead wrong, Robert. She went for it anyway. Queen f3. I thought her idea was just to, like, you know, play bishop f4 and maybe put some pressure on f6. But she did end up castling queenside.
Well, after the bishop came to d6 for black, castling kingside was off the table, at least for that move, because h2 would have been hanging. You would have to play g3 first, instead castling queenside. And the reason I don't like this is because now after trading on g6 and black playing c5, it feels like black is the one gaining important space in the position. And something I mentioned about the Scandinavian more generally is the light square bishop for white doesn't have good scope. So if this bishop comes to c2, I play f5, and your bishop is staring into a brick wall of a pawn structure. And so I think white will have to play moves like h5 or g4 just to give that bishop some breathing room. And in the meantime, black will play f5, maybe knight b6 into d5, and just try to claim more space. So I actually am liking black's position this far. I don't think white's worse, but I think that black has done a good job of creating play in the position.
Are there any senior games you want to take a quick look at since that round just started 10 minutes ago? Just kind of, you know, take a look at some of those openings.
Let's do it. Anyone in particular? We can just start from the top with Alexander Fishbein.
Yeah, that is our top seed, Grandmaster Alexander Fishbein.
And I'm pulling that game up here. And well, he has the black pieces, and it is a Jen Shahadi favorite, a Benoni.
Woohoo! I mean, I don't even really like playing the Benoni, but I like commentating on Benoni games. I like playing it if they don't like immediately. The longer the game lasts and you're not losing your d6 pawn, the more I like it.
It has those Sicilian vibes, right? If the game continues, it tends to be in black's favor, like the longer the game goes. So
exactly, because it's a space advantage for white in many cases. But this looks like a pretty good incarnation of the Benoni because this bishop on g5 doesn't really strike me as that powerful. It's not going to be that amazing. I mean, how are we going to get more pressure on that pin piece? E5, we can just take it. And we can also just move the queen when we want to because the bishop on d7 adequately defends f6. And meanwhile, I really usually like the bishop on f4 in the Benoni so that you're really hitting me where I'm weak, that d6 pawn.
I think you've raised many instructive points here. And I want to point out that white's rating is not 800. This isn't a grandmaster versus a new player. It's just because if you have not played a single game in one of the time controls on chess.com, that is your starting rating. So I just looked it up. White's rating is actually 2100. Very talented player and somebody who's been playing for a long time. So probably knowing the different nuances in the Benoni and saying, I want to play this bishop g5 line because maybe I want to entice my opponent, my grandmaster opponent, to play h6. And especially if you are playing someone who is the stronger player, right, on the overall, the grand scheme of things. You were saying this earlier, maybe mixing it up, creating some problems in the early stages of the game could be optimizing your own winning chances. So that after h6, eventually when I put my queen on d2, this pawn on h6 can be a target. So I think that white is going to drop the bishop back to e3 rather than h4 because I actually don't like the bishop on h4. It allows eventually g5 to be played. So I would drop it back on this diagonal towards e3 and then play knight d2, knight c4, and play in the more sort of standard Benoni fashion.
So Alex Fishbein, have you ever played him, Robert?
I have, yes. A number of times, actually.
Yeah, and you know, he's a very strong chess player considering that I think he's maintained a career outside chess for a very long time. So I've always been impressed by how Alex Fishbein manages to do that.
He's really a huge chess lover. And there are other players in the senior field. I was looking at the list of players. We have Enrico Sevillano, we have Alonso Zapata, Michael Rhodes, Sergei Kudrin, Larry Kaufman, Ron Burnett. These are players who have been playing at all these open events in the U.S. chess scene, in the CCA events and whatever it may be, U.S. championships past, they have been a mainstay of those events. So it's really cool to see them play in this tournament. It's online. It's played for them 1 game today, 2 tomorrow, and then 3 a weekend from now. So they can take their time preparing, take their time playing, and some of these competitors have played at the very highest of levels before, and it's great to see them exhibit their game online.
Let's take a look at Martha Samadashvili's game, because I'm really intrigued by that one, Robert, as she's just played this move queen to h4. This is a very tight fight right now, as we see Black doing some really smart things. I'll let you pull up the game. That was a game where we really were impressed by Black's handling of the opening, considering the wide rating differential. She seemed really well prepared. And now she's got that rook on b8, kind of limiting the scope of the bishop on c1. Although I do prefer White's position here. It seems like our attacking chances are very real. But also Black's position has a lot of defensive energy to it, because that knight on e6 guards the critical g5 square. And so we can't just do something like takes on g6, bishop h6, knight g5, and checkmate you. Life is not going to be that easy.
No, that would be really excellent for Martha, but no, chess doesn't come that easily, sadly. And Black does have a move in between to figure out, well, is h6, g6 with Jennifer's bishop h6? It looks kind of threatening. I'm worried about that. So I'm trying to find a move now for Black that stops that or makes it less threatening. Queen to d8 is a move that comes to mind, offering the exchange of queens. Of course, White does not have to trade queens there, but it does take another piece hitting the g5 square.
Yeah, I don't want to trade queens at all as White, because I think Black could be even a little bit better in the endgame because of that pressure on the d file. I mean, maybe better is a strong statement, but I have the 2 bishops, pressure on the b file. I'd rather be Black if you go queen d8, rook d8. I'd rather be Black in that position.
1,000%, 1,000% agreed. And the d3 pawn is also weak. Only Black has a light square bishop. Yeah, completely agree with you, Jennifer.
So queen d8 could very well happen here. Now, another tactic that I would be fantasizing about here is White, because remember we talked about how important the defensive abilities are of that knight on e6. I'd be thinking, can I do that same thing with bishop h6 and knight g5, but add a sacrifice on e6? Now, one of the problems with that idea, and it's a good idea, is that after rook e6, remember that Black can also take with the f pawn, and that allows the queen to laterally defend, which could be really helpful. Yeah, so I'm not sure it's going to quite work out.
I'm going to show a variation. Let's say Black plays a6, just to put that on the board, where if h takes, rook takes e6. Jennifer's point was that after f takes e6, importantly, this queen defends the h7 square. So knight g5 looks like you're going for a checkmating attack with queen h7 check next, but bishop f6 is not so fast. My queen covers h7. It's a very important defensive resource that I think some of our less experienced viewers say, whoa, that attack looks dangerous. I can't do that. No, once f takes e6, that queen opens itself up, protecting all the way across the 7th rank.
Indeed. So this is going to be a really great battle, though. They're both playing so well. Meanwhile, by the way, another one of our favorites in the Haring, Jennifer Yu, has won her game. We saw that she was basically a pawn and soon to be another pawn. So she was the first favorite to win in the Haring. Let's see, what else do we have? We have Annie Wang's game. Still looking really nice for White, as that queen on g4 looks like it just doesn't have a lot of squares, Robert.
It really doesn't look good there.
I mean, h3, I guess you can still play queen g5. So you are hanging on to your queen, but it's also your position is the problem, right? Like things like f6 coming into the game as well.
Right.
Yeah, this is looking really sweet for Annie Wang, the Jolly Rancher / actually the Happy Farmer. For those of us who weren't there when I told that story, Annie Wang loved Jolly Ranchers as a kid. And so when she signed up for chess.com, the Jolly Rancher was taken. So she had to pick words that were similar to Jolly and Rancher. And that is why she's the Happy Farmer. And she told me actually on Ladies Night podcast that raspberry is her favorite flavor.
Wow. I mean,
Jolly Ranchers. Like
the more you know. I'm learning new things every time you tell the story now.
yeah. Annie Wang is great. She's an incoming MIT freshman. She doesn't really keep a high profile on social media like some of the other young stars do, so people might know a little bit less about her. But I'm a big fan of Annie. She's very got a great personality. She seems very happy, and really just like grateful for the opportunities to play chess.
Yeah, and she's had some tremendous performances. You pointed out her Pan American success, winning the gold medal and the International Master title. Her FIDE rating, which is how you get these titles, is around 2,400, I believe 2,380 something. She is currently ranked number 4 amongst U.S. women in terms of FIDE rating at the very least. So she, if the Olympiad were to have taken place, I believe she would have been qualifying. Though a lot of that depends on who wins the U.S. Women's Championship, because that's an automatic qualifier. So she is on the verge of being on the U.S. Women's Olympic team, which is great. It's great to see players like Annie thrive. Of course, some of the players who've been there for a while, who are jockeying for those spots, they may say, "Whoa, Annie, slow down here. I want to keep my spot on the team." But it is really nice to see players like Annie, Jennifer, Carissa, and all the others. They're not just up and comers; they're the present, and they're making their mark in the chess world.
One inspiring thing that Annie told me actually in our interview on Ladies Night was that she actually felt her heartbreaking loss in the U.S. Women's Championship in 2018, where, she played phenomenally and lost her final game to be forced to play a playoff, which she won the first game of and then lost 2 games in a row. Oh, an absolute heartbreaker. And Annie is like usually so cool and calm, but even that moment you saw like she did really seem upset. And she told me that if she had won, she wasn't sure she would be as strong of a player today, because the fact that she lost made her really examine what went wrong and, come up with like new motivations and ambitions. And now she's an IM and has gained a lot of rating points since then and become the the Pan American junior champion for boys and girls.
Yeah. That actually is really cool to hear that she said that, because some people, they're so devastated by an important game that they've lost that they just, it's over for them. They're like, oh no, how could they never get over it? Right? They feel like there's a vendetta against that event, against that player, against chess in general. But she says, you know what? I've actually improved because I didn't win that. It motivated me, so the next time I'm in that situation, I can win that tiebreaker. And of course, Nazi Paikidze ended up winning that one. She lost the first game of the tiebreaker, won the next one to tie it up, and then won the tiebreaker game there. Well, tiebreaker of a tiebreaker, the Armageddon game, to win that U.S. Women's Championship. Unfortunately for Annie Wang, it wasn't meant to be, if you will. However, she will have a long and successful chess career ahead of her if she wants to and continues to play.
Absolutely. And let's take a look at our top seed in the Denker as we see Speed Skater against Raging Knight, and see that is Nicholas Cheka, the top seed in either tournament. He is playing with the black pieces here, and it's looking like a nice little masterclass here as black's got just a great position, I think. His king on b8 seems pretty safe, and now it's his turn. And because of that hook on h3, I feel like the idea of like rook g8, h5, and g4 is going to be nasty. I also have the opportunity to put my knight on f4 at the right moment. So the question for me is, can white mix things up somehow so that it's not playing one goal? He needs to somehow push his pawns forward, maybe get b4 and b5 in. I don't know, Robert. I'm really liking Nicholas's game here.
And what you were saying about white trying to get b4, b5, that feels a lot slower than rook to g8, pawn to g4, knight to f4. The attack seems to come so much more quickly. From black's point of view here, you first point out the king on b8 looking safe and sound. The minor pieces looking excellent for black. Good coordination, the ability to break through on the king side. I love this position for black. And I'm trying to, say that, but also come up with ways for white to prevent some of this aggression. So I think you have to, of course, move your queen. It's under attack. So queen e4 feels like a good square, because at the very least, it went back to d2 as soon as I said that. But I felt like on e4, it makes g4 a little bit more difficult because you have a second piece hitting the square. But instead, queen to d2 was played. And I mean, Jennifer, I'm just looking at rook d8 to g8 and pawn to g4. It feels like there's got to be some kind of mating attack coming.
Yeah, yeah. I just love that. And what I like about this is also if you look at his patience, because it seemed like he did take time to castle queenside to prevent knight b5 with a6, and that's something you really see from these great players is that they're able to execute their attack, but also to be patient. Really love to see it. Hey, Robert, how many times have you played in the Denker? Did you ever get a chance to play that tournament?
I played precisely 0 times.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I just never played in the state tournaments to qualify. And actually, my scholastic history in U.S. chess tournaments is not particularly long. I played when I was in kindergarten through 3rd grade. I won the K3 Super Nationals when I was in 3rd grade. I didn't play in the Nationals again until high school, just because, it's hard to play in those events when you're the person everybody's targeting, because there's so many talented people and the expectation is strictly you are the player that everyone says is going to win the event. And if you don't win, you're a disappointment. If you do win, it was expected. So it just didn't really feel like the type of event that was one that I wanted to compete in. My team in middle school, we didn't really have a chance for the team event. So then finally in high school, when I was surrounded by other players who really were itching to win that national team event at Stuyvesant High School. We had Andrew Reba, Zach Wiener, Eigen Wang, a lot of very good players around 2,200 rated. We actually won that year. And so that was the one and only time I played after 3rd grade. It was high school. 11th grade, the Super Nationals in, where was it? In Tennessee.
Nashville? Yeah, it tends to be in Nashville. And we do have one planned for 2021. So that'll be quite a party for everybody who wasn't able to play in the Nationals this year. And what's really interesting, Robert? Like, how do you feel like the level of play is going to be when people come back? Because there's part of me that thinks that with all this time to study and work on online tactics and less time for other activities like sports and parties, that people actually been working hard on their chess, so they're going to be at a high level. But then also the kind of rust associated with not playing over the board, I'll be interesting to see. I don't know what it's going to look like. I think my theory is that like overall there will be an improvement, and people are going to get really strong, but that in the short term there might be more blunders because people are just less used to playing across the board from each other.
I think it's possible that some of these classical chess events, the games will be done in 5 minutes because they're so used to only playing blitz. So they'll be like speeding through the opening. Oh, there goes my knight. Wait a second. My opponent has, that doesn't say a minute and 12 seconds. This is an hour and 12 minutes. Yeah, okay. Got to resign this one. And I do think that some players will benefit from the strict focus on chess, trying to improve their game. I do think the rust factor will be very real because people ask me this all the time, Jennifer. Well, you commentate a lot. Do you feel like you're improving as a player? There is nothing that can replicate that game scenario of being in a position where there are 6 different moves that look equivalent in value and figuring out which of those paths you want to go down because the strategies may change depending on the move you play. And that is impossible to replicate unless you're in a game or if your coach is giving you a position, says, calculate right now, let's go through this position and tell me all your thoughts about it, which is what I tend to do with my students. So I think that element is one that's going to be very difficult for people to just jump back into. But if it's difficult for everybody, then it's kind of a wash, isn't it?
That's a good point. Yeah, you always have an opponent in chess. We're not playing computer. So, Robert, I didn't realize you still do a lot of coaching because I figured you're really busy. You just have a few select students, I take it?
Yeah, I don't do too much coaching just because of all the commentary I'm doing. But yeah, I do have some students. And, for me, that's why I love doing the commentary on this. I feel like I'm helping to coach so many people to they can have the entertainment to watch games unfold, but also learn things. I really value the opportunity to help people improve. And I know you do too, Jennifer. You've been commentating for a long period of time. You've, of course, done so many sessions coaching at the U.S. Chess School for these the young female players who are up and coming in the United States. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar, Jennifer, I'll give you the floor here because this is a U.S. chess event. You should tell everybody what all the initiatives you've been a part of.
Oh, I'm so excited right now about how the women's program is going. It's really, I mean, there are some challenges as well. Let me start about the negative. The negative is that because there are fewer over the board tournaments, some people who are only joining US Chess in order to play in those tournaments have, sapped their memberships, which, is which is sad because that's a source of revenue, but it's also more importantly a way for people to connect to the organization through the magazine and through other events and all of our online programming. So, and that particularly hits the women hard, actually, Robert, because we have a larger percentage of our female membership is youth membership. And so that's where we're seeing like a greater drop off, right? Especially with the spring scholastics, that a lot of people would have rejoined at that moment. Right. So that's a negative side. But the positive side is, especially for the teens, I'm finding ways to make connections that were more difficult to do over the board live, because we have these clubs and these meetups with the teen girls and then with all the girls, and we have like hundreds of people showing up. And they're making friends, and we're also teaching them things outside chess. Like we had Jen Yu and Annie Wang the other day, along with Fiki Hunt and Claudia Munoz, talk to the girls about applying for college and balancing school and chess. And there was 80 teen girls. Now, wow. It's really normally hard to get 80 teen girls together because, usually girls chess is dominated by the more young ones, right?
Right.
So this is like an opportunity that the online space is allowing us. And it makes me excited for the future that we'll have more retention among those teens. And that'll be great because then we'll just have more people playing chess, period, and more women.
Oh, I'm completely in agreement with you. And, it is a shame that historically chess has just been for men only, right? With the start of chess, that's what it was. And that's why we've had a slow catch up in terms of getting more female players, more women involved. And I am somebody who is a big supporter of the work you do and just in general of making chess approachable for all. We have the online Olympiad going on right now. I think that's an amazing event for players from all over the world, from places without resources, who aren't promoted in the same way, who don't have just the backing of people in their lives, whether it's coaches. Just seeing them compete, that's really great. And I think what you do, Jennifer, is really influential, very important, and something I'm a big supporter of it. And I'm very glad to commentate with you, but also just to know you personally and know everything you've done. I don't even say this just because you're online with me now. I say it to everybody who will hear me out. I really appreciate it, Jennifer. I think so many people do.
Thank you so much. And one other thing is that we wanted people, we were getting some really big heavy hitters to coach at our girls clubs. In addition to like Jen Yu, we have Alexandra Botez, Anna Rudolph, some of the biggest stars in the game. So we wanted people who can't make the sessions either because they don't qualify or because meaning that they're not girls, right? Or that they couldn't make it. We do have excerpts of those lessons all up on our YouTube channel at the U.S. Chess Federation. And our recent one is Katerina Nemkova on forcing moves. And wow, Katerina is just a phenomenal coach. So you can go over and check them out, like maybe on our break. But as we've been talking, Robert, I've noticed that there have been a few moves in this checker game. And Rook C3 was played, beckoning the queen to D7. But what does white do now? Like that knight on F4 is so strong. I want to figure out some way to make some counterplay, but I'm struggling to figure out how to get any more pieces in the game. And now bishop B4 is a threat as well.
Bishop B4, that's annoying. And then F4 is already annoying. Maybe I can take care of both at the same time with knight D4 back to E2. And the reason why that's okay is, well, if you take on E2, we're just trading knights. If you play bishop B4, it still looks like a pin, but I'm able to avoid the pin by trading queens on D7. Although actually, maybe this doesn't work out the way I intended to, because there's intermezzo, knight takes E2 check, that I'm just seeing now. Oh, wait a second. I thought that I was just going to trade all the pieces off and not be in any danger. But after knight E2 check, I take the queen next. The rook on C3 is still under attack. Perhaps white can, weasel his way out of this. It just looks really suspect.
Yeah, this is going to be a tough one for white, but hey, he is playing against the highest rated player in the entire event. So yeah, it could be a good learning experience, no doubt. Let's see what's going on in the defending champions game. I kind of keep coming back to this game just because it seems like the closest among favorites, Robert. It's like the other favorites all seem like they're cruising to a victory, particularly Annie Wang, and then also Praveen, I think he's the number 2 seed in the Denker international master from Virginia. And Carissa is also looking good now too. But I don't know about Martha, our defending champion. Like, of course, she's still the favorite to win the game, but her position, that move we predicted, Queen D8, did get played. And because Martha did not want to trade queens, just like I didn't want to, she played Queen to H2. But that's a awkward spot for the queen if she doesn't get to checkmate. So if she gets to checkmate, great. But if not, Black could end up being a lot better here.
Yeah, it's one of those moves where you're hoping you're channeling your inner Alpha Zero and you're bringing your queen back just to unleash an attack later in the game. But the queen on A2, it does feel wrong here. And part of it is because it's knight on G3. A knight, I say this all the time, and I know I sound like a broken record at this point. A knight is often dominated by a pawn 3 squares away. This pawn on G6 says, no forward progress for your knight on G3. So because your knight can't leap forward, your queen is feeling particularly impotent on H2. It's not helping you in this attack. And so you want to push your pieces forward, especially as you go on H4, H5, and you cannot do so. You can play H6, but the problem with doing this is you release the tension very early. And as soon as you play H6, this bishop, let's say, goes to F6, and now you no longer have the threat of H6, G6. The execution of it may not be so intense or impossible for Black to deal with, but they do say in chess that threat is often stronger than the execution.
Yes, indeed. And that said, I mean, I keep talking trash about Queen H2, but I still kind of like the move, like of all the other options, because I definitely didn't like trading queens and putting the queen like over to the other side of the board on A4. Like, yeah, I'm more interested in the king side. So we're just pointing out the negatives of the move. I don't necessarily think it was a bad move.
Yeah, it's an odd looking position for the queen, but I do agree with you that it was smarter to keep the queens on the board. And now the question becomes, okay, so the queen's on H2, the knight on G3 isn't doing so much. Maybe it's time to retreat the knight to F1. I don't know what that accomplishes besides opening up the diagonal for the queen. And can his knight somehow get to G4? Is that an idea? Like knight F1, knight E3, knight G4? It takes a long time. But when you're looking at a chess game, you should think, what are the dream squares for my pieces? Are those dream squares realistic? Can I accomplish that goal? I don't really see how white is going to make progress. Maybe rook, I think looking at rook E2 just to protect this pawn on B2 as well, and then free up the bishop and then get the other rook in the game. I just don't think that white really has so much going well for her here, and Black's position ultimately is very stable.
And the problem for white, but this is good because she does have an extra 15 minutes on the clock, I think it's more difficult for white to play this position because Black's position is more like normal looking and harmonious. So like rook E8 or something, I'm playing as Black next move against like lots of your different moves. Just like a nice little developing move that improves my position. Whereas like you're talking about from white's point of view, like all these weird contortions, and that requires more energy and more thought. So it's good that Martha has an extra 15 minutes because I think she needs it.
Yeah, it's just contortionism is a good way of putting it. I'm frightened by contortionists. I love shows like America's Got Talent, but anytime a contortionist comes on, I'm like, that is not humanly possible. I don't know how that's happening. It scares me. And so that's the kind of gymnastics you have to go through here to just improve your pieces. So I don't think that white is lost or anything. Of course not. I think objectively the position is only slightly better for Black. I just see more possible ideas, whether it's going rook to E8 or just saying rook to B7 and then queen out to A5 or something. You know, I feel like Black is a little more flexible here, and white is struggling to come up with a concrete plan.
And by the way, I shout out to Martha for not only being such a great chess player, but also being a real community leader. She is one of 4 girls that created a club called the Unruly Queens, and they have been doing fundraisers online for COVID-19 relief. They've done some workshops for girls, and they pull in people like Grandmaster Irina Crash. Definitely a formidable quartet, and like nice to see young people who are at home and unable to do the normal types of community service that they'd be able to do, find a way to do it online. I mean, it's really impressive, some of these young people, what they do in and out of chess.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a group on chess.com, the Unruly Queens, as well, if you want to like join it so that you can be kind of in the loop about all their events.
It is really cool to see at such a young age how people are giving back, and that, you know, it goes to show that in chess, it's not about your age. It's about, you know, what you are as a chess player. And that's what's so cool. You see this at tournaments where there are 8-year-olds playing 80-year-olds. And the 8-year-old may be the favorite in one game, the 80-year-old in another. It's cool. It is really cool. And it's great to see that these young talents are giving back, whether it's coaching, whether it's organizing tournaments. These kind of things are very valuable for local communities. And I think it's amazing that the players are taking part.
All right, let's see. She did play rook e2. She played your move, Robert. Rook e2, overprotecting the pawn on b2. Well, you did actually. I shouldn't say it's your move because you mentioned like 5 moves.
I cheated. They all were my moves because I said every practical move on the board.
By the way, Katerina has this nice little coaching technique that I like when she does our girls' clubs or when she does the U.S. chess school. She often does an exercise where the kids are asked to not give the move they want to play, but give 3 candidate moves. So that's really powerful because the kids, and not just kids, really anyone who plays chess and is trying to get better. Sometimes a big leak that they have, that's a poker term for a mistake that you often make, is that they will just fixate on the first move that they see that they want to play. And that like forces them. They might write the right move in the chat and it's still the wrong answer because the point is you bring in 3 moves. 3 moves that you could consider here. Rook e2, knight e2, knight f1, or knight, I think like knight e5, rook e2, knight f1 would be an example. And of course, you'd probably want to include the forcing moves, h6 and takes on g6. So that's a really powerful teaching tool, I think, Robert.
Yeah, no, it is. And it is also, for me, and I mean this very sincerely, it is cool to hear about different teaching methods because some people, have very different styles from others where some are like, you knew about this, Jennifer, growing up playing on the U.S. chess team as kids. Some are like very huge, just like you study this and do that. And others are like, no, let's make chess very fun. And there has to be a combination of the two because while chess is very fun, players trying to improve need to have a sort of routine going and different methodologies are cool. And especially Katerina, she's great. She's getting her PhD right now. She has a lot of a very strong academic background that can help her teach chess, and she's a friend of ours. And of course, we'll see her later today too. Actually, she's joining us.
Yeah. So we can talk more about her teaching techniques too. But the girls absolutely loved her because I think the thing is like these days with online learning, it's a bit tricky because it's very easy to, as a learner, to just passively watch because the teachers aren't there, so they can't really see what you're doing. But in the end of the day, people don't really want to passively watch. They really do want to be active, but sometimes you need to like kind of push them into that role. And yes. That's what something like, like here's a poll, here's candidate moves that you need to pick. It forces them into what they want to do anyway. And that of course is a great role of an educator. Now, speaking of education, I do think it's important here, Robert, to explain why h6 is not a move that most grandmasters would play instead of like if it's white's move here.
Right. h6 is too committal. And you only want to commit to this kind of move if it gets you something that you can clearly see. And h6 is like, well, I hit the bishop. Maybe eventually I get a backline checkmate because I'm taking away an escape square. No. h6 not happening too soon because you don't have the concrete follow-up you'd like. And I actually was going to say one more thing about a set of rules and things like that. I actually used to sit on my hands when I was a kid and played chess because I would sometimes move too quickly. And my coach, Miran Sher, the only coach I ever had, he would say, Robert, you got to sit on your hands because that way you will think before you take your hand from underneath your butt to make a move. You have a clear, you will think, and then you'll, move your hand. Obviously, it was when I was quite young and just always so eager to play the moves. We'd be doing lessons and he would show a position and I'd be like, knight c5, that's, whatever, screaming some kind of move and just wanting to move the pieces. But it really instilled in me the notion of, hey, wait a second. There is no rush unless you're playing bullet chess or you're in a blitz scramble of sorts. Like chill a little bit and just work through your options because when you make a move, you can't take it back.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of people really like writing their moves down. And because it has that same thing. It forces you to pause.
Yes, for sure. So I see a bunch of results coming in now. It's about that time in the round where they're having, like here, I see power of a point. And if I'm not mistaken, that is Alice Lee. She wins her. Ooh, what a final position this is. Oh, that's a checkmate because the bishops for black are taking away options for this white king here. So power of a point defeats. I had PowerPoint in my head and I was trying to say defeats and then it got to deletes and it just made me chuckle there. But she ends up winning her game here, up a piece at the end, but delivering a checkmate because the pawn on G2 cannot move as it's pinned to the king on H1.
Yeah, Alice Lee, very young player. She recently broke the she didn't break the record because Rachel Lee did it even younger, but she recently became a national master. And I remember one cool stat was that Rachel Lee and she were both 8, I believe, when they became experts. And they were like 2 months apart. Rachel's like 2 months younger, but they literally broke the record the same week. And I think that goes to show you often have these trends. And so if you have one very good youngster, you often have one that is looking at them and trying to keep pace. And so they rise together. And so I think we're going to see amazing things from Alice in the future. And maybe right now, she could be right up there in the top words in the final rounds, Robert.
I definitely think so. And I just went back to see how this happened because for H5, attacking this knight, I think that white made a very good practical decision because white is down a pawn. This knight actually is nowhere good to go. It can go back to H2, and then bishop C7 type moves happen where there's checkmates anyway. So knight F6 check, G takes rook F6. The threat is rook G6 check, which is very important because you're trying to win this queen on G3. The one downside is, well, the all-important one, queen takes H3 is check and mate on the spot, thanks to the fact that the pawn on G2 is pinned, and as mentioned, the king cannot escape to G1. So a very important tactical sequence that is easy to overlook, but once you find it, you say, okay, I can play this move H5 and push pawns in front of my own king to help deliver a checkmate.
Really nice stuff from Alice. And of course, we don't really have a lot of the results in the seniors yet because they started much more recently. I did mention earlier Praveen as one of our top seeds. So maybe we should take a look and see about how he's handling his nice position, but not that close to winning yet. Praveen Balakrishan is an IM. And yeah, he is right now looking to take that A pawn. But the question is, there's the B pawn intake first. So how does white proceed here?
Tough question because white is up a pawn and it's like not the most important pawn in the world because typically when you're a pawn, you want to push and create pass pawns. It just takes some time. And this F4 pawn is, well, I don't like that move G6, but I was going to say the F4 pawn is needed to defend the pawn on E5. So a thematic move is often to play this move G5, trying to say, please take my pawn on G5 and lose the defense of your E5 pawn. So moves on G5 were possible and is an option. G6 was played so that the bishop isn't attacking H7. But the reason I don't like this is you've opened up the length of the 7th rank. So you mentioned at the very beginning, Jennifer, the pawn A5 is hanging. I think now is the perfect time to scoop that one off with knight takes A5.
Indeed. And by the way, we got, I think we're actually going to take a quick break, but we got some other great games going. And there's one I can't wait to talk about on the other side of the break. But we will be right back with more from the U.S. Chess National Tournament of State Champions. We are covering the Denker, the senior, and the girls today. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our coverage of the Denker Tournament of High School Champions and the Haring Tournament of Girl Champions, Girl State Champions, and the Senior.
Too many events to state so quickly, but you did a great job, Jennifer. I sometimes forget the names or which ones are doing, but we have 3 events running concurrently here, and we've been focused mainly on the Denker and the Haring as those games are further along. I still have the board up because I've been so interested in this game with the reigning champion of the Haring, Martha Samarashvili, but I'm happy to go wherever you want to take us because there are so many fascinating battles taking place right now.
No, I'm actually really fixated on that one too, because it seems like you said, Robert, that despite the 600-point rating differentials, you thought there might be one upset in round 1. And, it looks like this one is, one of the potential candidates for that, as we've really thought that Black's been doing quite well. But what have the last couple of moves brought us?
It seems like the knight from f3 went into e5, which looks very smart. So bishop to d7, rook e2, and then knight went to e5, and queen to c7 was the last move played, hitting this knight on e5 a second time. And, well, to my eyes, I don't really want to take this bishop on d7 because it's not doing anything, but I also don't want to retreat my knight. So how do you make the best of a situation where both options don't exactly look too appealing?
Yeah, that's a good question because I agree with you. I definitely don't want to let you take my knight for free. That's for sure. I could play knight f1 so that if bishop takes e5, I have rook takes e5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Actually, knight f1 may just be the move. It's so funny. I was thinking of being aggressive, but sometimes the best way forward is by taking a step back. Because a move like f4, to my eyes, that just looks so risky, pushing all your pawns forward. If you get an attack, that'd be lovely. But if you're not getting attacked, you're overextending and creating weak squares in your position. But knight f1 says, I'm not going to commit my pawns to anything. I'm going to protect my knight on e5. And Jennifer actually really like that simple move, just the knight retreat.
And the thing is, it would be really nice if we had some kind of ideas like for discoveries. But after knight f1, bishop e5 doesn't look that strong because I don't think the endgame is as good if you don't have the 2 bishops, especially that beautiful dark squared bishop. So I could take with a rook, and if you play f6, forcing me the endgame, that's not that bad. But I also might just take with the queen right away, Robert, because I don't think the endgame is good for you anymore because you don't have the 2 bishops and your pawn structure c5, c6, d5 is nothing to write home about.
Yeah, I would say that it's a position with a really interesting dynamic of opposite colored bishops. So what does that mean, everybody? It means that Black is going to try to make use of the light squares and maybe go after this d3 pawn, for example. And Black is going to make use of the White's going to make use of the dark squares and potentially have a bishop h6 type of move later, or bishop e3 to go after the c5 pawn. So I know that you hear from people, oh, opposite colored bishops just mean a draw. I've never thought that way. I just think it means that both sides are playing for different things. Sometimes you can't attack your opponent's squares because bishops have inherent limitations. They can only work on their color complex, but it makes it a mixed bag and a different dynamic for both sides. So I actually would be very curious to see this endgame unfold. And Jennifer, I want to take our attention to one game very quickly because I see the username rookmate34. And I see that the final position was a rookmate on d2. So I just thought that was funny that a very aptly named player here, rookmate with the rookmate.
What's the most satisfying piece to give a checkmate with?
Oh, gosh. Like besides promoting to a knight or something crazy like that, I think a knight. I still think a knight. What about you?
Well, I'd have to go with the absolute rarest, which wouldn't be the pawn, but the king.
Oh.
Because you can get a checkmate either by castling or by moving your king and making a discovered mate, right?
Have you ever had that happen before?
I think just in a blitz game. In a tournament game, I've never done that. But
I'm so jealous.
Yeah, I think I must have in a blitz game. I just like moving the king and like discovering a checkmate. It probably didn't come out as that notable to you because maybe it would be like, your king's on h2 and you just play queen g1 and it's like a ladder mate. But anyway, fun times. I want to take a look at a game between two players we haven't looked at yet. One of the top seeds actually in the Denker, Andrew Hong and Iris Zhao, who is one of the Missouri representatives, as this tournament has 2 spots for players from Missouri, as this tournament was originally supposed to happen in St. Louis.
So they get a local sort of, it's just like the Olympiad, right? In the Olympiad, which are teams from all over the world, the host country gets a second team in because they're hosting. So actually, I like that a lot, to have a second player, and seems like she's a very good inclusion. And this position now, after bishop takes d5, it's opening up real quick here.
It's opening up, and that is scary for the moves g4 and f4. When you play these moves g4 and f4, you're hoping for some kind of controlled attack. And this is quite the opposite of that. And I'm afraid that that's going to be bad news for white.
Yeah, she did just steal a pawn. And actually, there's a very instructive moment here, Jennifer. Maybe she shouldn't have taken that pawn. It's easy to say now that it's happened, and I'm starting to get worried about white's king. But this pawn isn't really going anywhere. And you said you played f4 and g4 to have a controlled attack. Perhaps playing f5 and trying to play f6, just push this pawn forward. It feels like it does make white's life more difficult on one hand, because you're opening up queen and bishop to the h2 square, but your queen on d2 is doing a good job controlling that. And then it does create some threats of your own involving the move f6.
True. I mean, to be fair though, at some point white could play d4 anyway if we really are determined to open things up, but that might not be quite as strong because in this position, are you thinking that black's going to play something like rook to d8?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, black's also up a pawn, which I didn't count initially, but black took a pawn on a4, so black is up a pawn, and rook to d8, rook to e8. I think that bishop e5, all these moves still look really pleasant for black, but I'm just looking at this f6 move, right? That's really what I'm just trying to come up with, some sort of aggressive intentions here. Otherwise, why did I put my pawns on f4 and g4?
Now I'm seeing something strange. People are playing blitz in between their next rounds. Okay, got it.
You're like, wait, why do they have 2 minutes left?
Yeah, because I saw like a 19-second versus 19 seconds pairing, and I was like, oh, okay, these people just can't get enough chess. They're playing like 3 70-minute games today, but in between their next game, they need to play a few blitz scans. You know what? I don't recommend that.
Well, they're trying to imitate a real tournament when, the parents and coaches like, come on, let's go get lunch. We only have this amount of time before the next game. Like, no, just a few blitz games with my friend, mom. It's okay. Like, I'll have lunch in an hour. It's what happens at every single tournament with kids. So I understand having, whoa, what a move here by Andrew Hong, by the way. Bishop b4, giving up the dark square bishop to get the light square bishop. And this is another instructive moment about opposite colored bishops work. The side that has the safer king is the side that's much happier in opposite colored bishops positions. And here, if you take on b4 and give up this d5 bishop, this king now on g1 is going to be in big trouble on the light squares.
Yeah, really nice move, bishop b4. And that's an example of where candidate moves could really help you. Just scanning to look at those extra options. Because, you start out with rook e8, rook d8, and bishop takes d5. But unless you make a conscious effort to widen your choices, you're not going to really look at bishop b4.
Yeah, it's not a move that comes to mind at first. You talk about these candidate moves, and you said rook e8, rook d8, bishop b5. That's the moves that come to my mind first as well. And then you see bishop b4. And the point is, you want to think about trades and how they benefit you. So, for instance, black can take on d5 right away, but maybe it helps the white queen get a little more active. And you're not afraid of white taking on c6 because it helps the black queen get active. So throwing a move in between could be useful. And bishop b4 says, well, to heck with all of that. I'm not trying to trade the bishops. I'm trying to give you my dark square one so I get the light squares and try to checkmate the white king.
Meanwhile, in the game that we've been following carefully between Martha and Art Master Queen, we saw your move, your first instinct, Robert. F4 was played, and then the move bishop to e8. And now we're going to see whether Martha can unravel her pieces and kind of mount some type of attack, as the time is growing short in this game.
This f4 move, it's good with the attack. It's bad if the attack is parried. And bishop e8 feels like it's too passive of a move. I get it. You want to maybe push f6 and keep g6 pawn defense, something like that. But it just feels like you're squishing in your rook here, and you don't actually have a follow-up to boot. So it just feels off to me.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And by the way, our top seed in the girls tournament, the happy farmer, the jolly rancher, the one and only international master Annie Wang, she did get a checkmate on the board. Queen takes e7, so she starts 1-0.
Yeah, she just did a rook lift on move 31 with rook f3, trying to bring her rook in the attack, and the queen is helping out. And after rook here, rook takes h6 to free pawn, and look at this checkmate. Bishop h7 check. If the king comes to h8, discovery, thank you for your queen and for the game. And instead, the king went to f8, but queen c5 and queen e7 is checkmate. The king is locked in. So a nice start there by Annie Wang.
Really interesting situation right now with Carissa Yip, who's gotten down to 4 minutes left on the clock, as this could go either way, Robert, as it looks like Black's got ideas of playing like knight b2 and queen a2, or knight c3 and queen a1, but White's got ideas too of playing, I don't know, h6, h7 and queen.
You're like, I don't know. Oh, wait, that one looks pretty good. Getting a queen, that's enticing. And if that's too slow, h takes g6 to bring the rook into h8 for a check.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, to my eyes, no engine here. It looks like Black's attack is more serious because your move knight takes b2 with queen a1, queen a2 stuff to follow, that's hard to contend with here.
So let's take a look. Like, say, suppose we play h takes g6. Knight takes b2.
Okay.
You can't play king takes b2 because it really is just mate in 2.
Yes.
So that would be the end of the story. And that would be a big upset to start first round. But, of course, Chris is not going to play that. So if she plays h takes g6 and knight takes b2, the question is, are you actually threatening to mate us if we play something like g7? Because queen a, what I'm thinking is queen a1 check, king d2, knight d1, rook d1 is, of course, totally fine for me. But what about knight c4 check?
I think the king can just run back to e1 or e1. The c3 pawn is protected.
Yeah.
Rook queen is under attack. g8 equals queen is the threat. So maybe we'll have to keep looking because we just went through one line quickly. But you're right that the immediate check, check, check sequence, the checks run out, and White is the one who's promoting. So let's take a step back.
It's a shame that our king is on b8 because I feel like b2 would be a spectacular move there. But let's see what she played. She did not play h takes d6. She played h6. So let's see how the permutation works now after knight takes b2.
I mean, this looks
scrumptious.
Yes, scrumdiddlyumptious here, taking on b2. I mean, this attack. And one thing I'm going to say before we even continue analyzing is Black has 21 minutes. If Black does not spend at least 7 minutes here, I will be a little bit upset in my coaching phase. In my commentary phase, I'll be like, okay, let's keep looking. But I think this is a really important moment. If Black is not winning, he is losing because this pawn is about to promote and White's already up material. So Jennifer, I think it's really important, especially for some of the younger players, and this is a tournament of scholastic players, K-12, to just take your time. You're up plenty of time here. So I would really advise players to not just move because you think you have something. Double, triple, quadruple check to make sure that that variation goes as accurately as you intended to, and try to take it half step further. It's really difficult to do in our heads. But Jennifer, I can't tell you the amount of times where I've thought a line is good for me, and then I get to that position, and then my opponent's next move just causes me to resign or to have a bad position.
Wow, that's sobering to hear, Robert. And by the way, I think this is a great time for that, like, Katerina technique of making us pick 3 candidate moves, because of course I start with knight b2. I'm fixated on it, but guess what? There's also knight takes c3 because queen c3, there's rook c6. And there's also knight c5 because pawn c5, there's queen a1 mate. So I don't know. Those are my 3. I guess but I think also there's a 4th queen e2 that I would certainly be looking at. That can probably be quickly met by rook d2. But my point is that you want to kind of consider all these in make sure that you don't miss one, right? Because even rook d2, there's queen e4 after that. Maybe that's winning somehow, right? You don't know until you analyze it. You can't immediately identify. Well, maybe some people can, but you can't immediately identify whether or not it's good. So you got to kind of organize your top moves and pick one. Did I miss any, Robert?
No, I think that those are one. No, I'm trying to come up with like outside the box moves. Rook to c6 right away. No, that doesn't look right. But I think it is important to go through those candid moves, and especially because once you make a move, you cannot take it back, right? So let's say some kind of move needs to be thrown in, whether it's queen e2 or whatever it may be. You can't make a next move if your opponent wards off that threat. So knight takes b2, it has to be the move. I mean, it just simply must, right? But let's try to. Oh, and knight takes b2 was played. Didn't take the amount of time I said. Took 3 minutes. And h7.
Okay, h7.
Wait.
What about knight c4 here? Oh no, you're queening. What about knight?
No, you're right, Jennifer. Knight c4 wins because knight c4, h8 equals queen, king c7. You have no more checks, and I'm just going to mate you next move.
You don't have a single check. Wait, what about king b1?
And the queen a2 check.
Queen a2 anyway, and mate. Oh my god, and he did it. Knight c4.
Oh my gosh, and that's the difference, Jennifer. I just realized between h6, g6, and h6. If this pawn were captured on g6, g7, g8 equals queen, then you have queen takes f7 check. You get a bunch of checks going, and white will survive that game. But by playing h6, h7, and now h8, you have no more checks. The king comes to c7, and that is checkmate for black. And we talked about the potential of big upset. I think that we're about to see one here.
Absolutely. And you're right, Robert. If we took on g8, not only that, we could play queen takes f7 and just sacrifice on c4 because we'd be up a rook, right?
Oh my gosh,
we could
exactly.
Play queen, we could play g8 equals queen. Can you imagine if we had our queen on g8 here? Just picture it, guys. Queen takes f7, king c6, queen takes c4, queen takes c4, and white's actually up a rook. But unfortunately, there's none of that business here. Oh, man. What a tough miscalculation.
And this is Quinn Hudson, who is trying to land this upset, a big one.
Okay, what about rook d3? No, just queen a2 and queen c2 mate. There's no running here for the king.
There's nowhere. I mean, this queen mate in 1. If the king goes to b1, there's queen a2. I just don't even see another way to. You said queen to d3, and the problem is there's still just queen to a1, queen b1, queen takes c3 is
queen c3. Yeah.
Or I think you said queen a3 as well. I mean, that's actually quicker. King b1, queen b2. It's
I wonder. I think Carissa missed this move, knight to ce4, which is understandable because it's a quiet move in a way. In that after you queen, normally with 2 queens and 2 rooks, there's some way to drive up some kind of counterplay. There's some way to do something here, but in this particular case, no.
It's very rare to allow your opponent to queen with check, a second queen with check, and that you're still winning. But this is one of those positions that illustrate that it is the quality, not the quantity of pieces, that dictates who is better. And this king on c1, king safety is paramount. This king is stuck on c1. Here comes the black queen in for a checkmate. And unfortunately for Carissa, she is going to lose this game. And Quinn Hudson with a humongous first round victory, unless something really crazy happens in the next couple moves, it will be a victory for Quinn Hudson in the opening round of Denker.
That's right. From Arizona, Quinn Hudson, U.S. chess expert, looked like he's about to take down an international master, a very popular international master at that. Carissa Yip, streamer, incredible player. And queen d3, this move, there were those 2 different methods you mentioned, Robert. Queen a1 check chosen, queen b1, queen c3, and that's going to be mate next move.
Resignation occurs, and that is the official upset.
Wow. Yeah. Tough game for Carissa, but a really beautiful idea for us to be able to witness. And I'm really glad we were on that game when it happened.
I am as well. And, I'm just scrolling through here. I see some interesting games. We saw this Christopher Shen game earlier. And I'm bringing it back up. It's Harmon's Sushi 09 versus CYS 9772. And I'm looking at his black king on f8, and I'm just desperately wishing, from white's point of view, that his knight were not on d5. Can I please give you a free piece? You'll be up 1. But if his knight's out of the way, there's queen f7 checkmate. The problem is there's a pressure down the c file as well, and black currently has threats of his own. So, I mean, if you don't get the checkmate, I feel like black is going to come first with some of the aggressive intentions.
That's true. And I can't play for knight c7 because rook c7 conveniently defends that square laterally. What if I just play the passive knight c3? I guess you just have rook c7 then, if nothing else.
Yeah, there's queen a7 as well to have a discovered check while defending the f7 square. But your move rook to c7 makes perfect sense to me. Queen c8 to follow, something like this with pressure. Eventually, this e4 pawn is under attack. It feels like white's position is very loose here.
What about this? What if we take on c8 first and then play knight takes f6? Do you have a mate there, or is it just a perpetual? Because I'm looking at the position, I'm kind of worried. And I'm like, maybe I should take a draw if I can as white. Because it looks really menacing, but if nothing works, that knight on b4 and like the possibility of playing queen a7, as you said, suddenly things might turn around and we could just lose.
Well, that's a really nice knight takes f6. I mean, black has queen c1, king f2, queen f4 check. This is the minimum draw that you were referencing, and actually thinking maybe more because this king can't even go to e1. Well, I guess it can, but let's say king to g1. There's queen e3 check. King has to go to f1. Oh, it just feels like we're so close to something after this king on f1. And whether knight to b3 with the threat of knight b2.
Ooh. Knight b3 looks really good. Yeah. That's a nice move.
Off and threatens knight d2 check. Oh my gosh, that's a sick move.
Brutal. That would be a bone cruncher. So what does white do? Knight f6 doesn't seem to work. Knight c7 doesn't work. Knight c3 is way too passive. Speaking of candidate moves, I don't know what to do here as white. I'm trying to figure. I need to come up with a good idea.
I'm doing my best as well. I'm trying to figure this out. Maybe there's maybe rook c8 is good, and then you start with king f2, one of these, like, it's not prophylactic exactly, but it's like just trying to avoid the checks as best as you can. So bringing the king to f2 says, all right, if you try to bring your queen to c1, then I have my knight retreating e3, stopping your checks while opening up this attack on the f7 square. So it looks a little risky, I have to admit. It's not a move that I'm really desiring to play, but it's possible.
Yeah, it's better than what we were just looking at. We got to do something. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have a lot of options, Robert, because you own the C file, does black. And we have to figure out a way to either mitigate that or create counterplay. Knight b6 would be another move I would look at. And that was played. But how is he going to deal with all of these invasions on c1? Of course, king f2 is forced now.
King f2 only move, then queen comes to f4. Actually, we might just see the same kind of variation with the queen coming to e3 with check, and this knight trying to come into b3, delivering a checkmating attack. This bishop on a8 is kind of irrelevant. It's not what's important here. It's the king's safety. So queen f4 check. Here it is. And also, if this king tries to go to e1, there's queen h4 takes h5 at the very least to say, hey, have fun with my bishop on a8. I'm taking your bishop on h5 and still having attacking chances.
Right. And that's if we don't like your ideas of just playing for the knight b3 idea. Okay, so this one looks like it's gonna be good for black. The king is just too exposed, and the knight on d4 is just too monstrous. I mean, even just like, yeah, well, you do have the mate threat on f7, so we have to be accurate, but King g1 was played, okay, and now we're expecting queen e3 check.
Yeah, queen e3, king f1, knight to b3. We saw a line just like this, with the threat being knight d2, check, and mate. So I think that black is ahead, which is kind of crazy, Jennifer, because when we started this position, white was the one with the discovery on the f7 square, and it just goes to show that this one move threat. White is hoping, putting all in on the threat of checkmate, but if you don't get that checkmate, it looks like white's position is the one that's collapsing.
Queen e3 check was played. Now, queen f2 is a possibility, but the problem is you're going to lose that. I might not mate you, but I am going to win in the long game.
Yeah, the e4 pawn collapses, and then f5 is in trouble, and black steals a pawn, happy to be with a surplus pawn in an endgame. So This is just a quick turnaround here, and looks like Christopher is going to win the game with the black pieces.
Yeah, so another non-upset, but we already had a massive upset this round. But will we have another one? Martha, the game we've been following quite a lot. Samarashvili versus Art Master Queen. And I remember that was Serena Evans from Connecticut. She's doing really well. They're now in an end game with, oh, wait a second. Actually, she's down a pawn. So maybe she's not doing that well, but she probably has some compensation, right, Robert? 2 bishops.
Yeah, your instincts are correct. And it's funny because I do this all the time where I don't count the material, but I'm like, oh, black's position looks good. I'm like, wait, there's 1 pawn missing. Still, it looks pretty good for black because the bishop pair looks nice. The open lines for the rooks, right? Black's pieces are coordinated better here. And what are you really doing with your extra pawn? I mean, you're not creating a pass pawn just yet. And the bishops tend to outclass knights when they're things happening on both sides of the board. Bishops are long range pieces. The knights, they're a little slower just by virtue of how they move. So I do think that black's position is completely fine here. And bishop to d2 played by white. And, well, the main question I have is about the clock and about, for black, which pawns am I eventually going to move and why? I'm going to play c4. I'm going to play d4. I'm going to play a5, a4. Too many different options considering you only have 4 minutes and 40 seconds.
Yeah. And then the move f5 is a question also for white. At some point, I would love to play the move f5, but you also have the move bishop e5 if I play f5. So every move that pushes a pawn forward gains something, but also lose something.
That's right. And it's important to remember that because a lot of people push pawns with reckless abandon, but you give up that control of that e5 square. Not only am I attacking your knight in the initial position, there may be some ideas with swinging rooks to the h file. Whenever you don't have a pawn to file, that is an open file for your rooks. So that's something to consider deep down the line as well. I think I like, from a strategic standpoint, playing a5, a4, just trying to restrict white's pawns on the queen side, and then maybe double rooks in the b file. So that feels like a good opportunity for black here.
I wish I could play, I know it's just a fantasy variation because suppose I play g5 here for black. It's a fantasy line because f5 is probably a good move, but if you take with the pawn, I really like that after bishop g6, you actually can't defend d3, and everything's going to collapse.
Well, it may be a fantasy line for now, but let's keep our eye out on that move. Great spot, Jennifer, that g5 is a really good idea at some point to try to improve the position of the bishop and this pawn d3. I mentioned a really long time ago, just offhandedly, in an opposite colored bishop dynamic. But that actually is a really good point, and there's potential to apply pressure on d3. For instance, if this bishop can jump to a6 right away, that would be a similar idea hitting this pawn. So it is something that white needs to keep an eye on, and black needs to think about these kind of possibilities. But instead, rook e to b8 played. I like it, putting pressure on b2. a5, a4, I believe, is coming next.
Yeah, difficult position for Martha to play. Will the defending champion go down? I feel like there's also that chance of a draw. Of course, it is an end game. Maybe Martha will find a way not to lose the game, even if she's under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
What else?
And I just want to say something about the chat. Not that I'm upset at all by anything, but I see people saying white is better. White is clearly better. I don't think that. When we look at these positions, it's important to not speak in certain terms because you should always give your opponents credit for what they're setting up here. And maybe you prefer white's position here. I personally don't think that white is better. I don't have an engine on, but I'm guessing that the engine also wouldn't think that white is better here because you don't actually have a clear plan to make progress. And it's important just to consider what your opponent is doing in restricting your pieces. So some of this will be deeper, tougher things to evaluate in the interim. Others will just be things that are very clear, like black's rooks are quite active on the b file. White's rooks are passively defending this pawn on b2. So there are pluses and minuses to both sides' position.
Yeah, definitely. Important not to be too blinded in this position by one side because both have chances. All right, let's take a look at that game between Ira Zhao and the Andrew Hong in the Denker Speed of Light versus Avocado Iris. That was the one where we had that nice move, bishop to b4. How's that turned out in Black's favor?
Okay, so bishop b4, the light square bishop was not given up without a trade, and then we did see the trade in c2. So look at the difference. If Black had captured on d5 right away, then the bishop on d6 was hanging. So what Andrew did was move his bishop out the way so that when he trades, there's no longer this piece hanging on d6. He scoops up a pawn on c2, and we've seen several moves since then with now a queen trade being offered on g2. So Jennifer, Black is up one pawn here. I thought it was two pawns. It's only one pawn. I think you want to avoid trading queens, right?
Yes, I think that Black would want to avoid the queen trade because of the weak king on h1. That is a big question whenever you trade queens. You got to ask whose king is safer. And if your king is safer, usually you don't want to trade queens.
That's very true here. And well, queen g3 says, hey, Jennifer is saying not to trade queens. Come on, please. I just put a queen trade up for offer once again. Take me on g3. No, Black is not going to do that. And where does the Black queen belong? Because I know I can give queen e4 check, then White will play queen to g2. So where is the Black queen really going from there? I can play queen to d4, hitting the b2 pawn. That looks reasonable. And then maybe White will play bishop e5, defending the pawn through the queen. So where does this Black queen want to go?
Good question. Where do we want to park ourselves where we're not going to get harassed too much? I mean, d4 looked pretty compelling, but you mentioned what move were you playing against that? Bishop b5, you said?
Yeah, which isn't the end of the world. It's a move that protects this pawn on b2, which I see that attack.
Yeah. Where else can I move it? What about just slide all the way back to d2? Okay, I like that idea.
Well, I think what you're about to say, slide back to e7. I think the queen's gonna slide to d7. It's a similar idea, just on a different file. Also, I didn't even notice it's under a minute left for Black here.
Yeah. Well, the time is running short now. This round was scheduled to end at around 1:30, and I think they started a few minutes late. So, probably going to end more like 1:40. But there's not a lot of time left on these clocks.
Yeah, wow. And we see that bishop e5 was played anyway, just preemptively protecting the pawn on b2. But what I'm concerned about is f6. Where is this bishop going? It has to go to c3, only safe square there. And once we trade on c3, White's b2 pawn will be forced to capture on c3, and then Black has this outside pass pawn. And that can be very useful as we approach endgame territory. So I'm looking for f6. Maybe rook takes c1 first, and that's actually what just was played here. And f6. So Andrew Hong, I don't know, exactly what he's listening to. It's definitely not me. It's not allowed. But we're on the same little mental wavelength here.
Yeah, well, he is playing well in this game, Robert. And we've only got a few other games left, by the way. We've got Real Madrid 2008. I don't think we've looked at that game yet. That is actually looking really good for White. And I think White's actually the lower rated player in this game. So their rapid ratings online are quite similar to each other. But in fact, there's a pretty big rating differential. That's Oliver Hegley None from DC against a 2,300 Joshua Grabinski from Oregon.
And I'm looking at this position, and what a crazy one it is indeed, where White is up, well, you would say up a rook for a bishop, but Black also has one pawn for that, and the king on h1 looks less safe to my eyes than the king on g8 does. Although there's rook d8 check, queen h4 type of stuff, it looks like the Black king can actually be very safe on g6 on that.
Yeah. Okay, so queen e7. So what are you suggesting here for Black?
Probably e3, just to open the white squares.
Yeah, that seems smart. You gotta seize your moment, right? Oh, so maybe I spoke too soon because I thought that rook d8 was coming in with devastating effect. But you're saying you actually like Black here, and Black is the higher rated player, so maybe this will go in Black's favor.
It does look though like rook d8, queen h4. It seems it should be something there, but the king somehow snaked its way up to g6. And I'll just show them the board. Let's say you make a move like a5, something random. Check here, queen h4, king to g6. Like there's nothing immediate. So now you have time because I made the move a5, something that is inconsequential. And now white does have time to create a threat with like rook g8, queen h6 check because the bishop is pinned. So that would be the time needed to deliver a checkmate for white. But if we go back to the start of the position here, I'm starting with e3. So whenever you check and check again, and my king gets to g6, now my threat is queen to b1 or queen to e4 with a checkmate. So the white king is in worse shape.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very instructive moment. I think that this could be one in a book, actually, just showing that E3, you need to do it to get the energy of your pieces involved. And that was played 2 minutes on the clock with 1 minute for Real Madrid. What a nice move.
It's just, it's timely. And speaking of time, it looks like white is now under a minute. It's going to be a tough position to figure out. I'm trying to think, where can you even go here? Queen takes b7, stops a check on e4 for the time being, but black can use this pawn, keep pushing it through to e2, which distracts the rook and threatens to even promote it. Just everything is happening all at once, and none of it is in white's favor.
I'm seeing some comments in the chat. Ruffle Ridges LOL says big piece energy. And Garen 700 says, Jen, Robert, can you tell us a little bit about this tournament and the players? Well, these are the US Chess State Invitational events. Right now, we've got the Denker Tournament of High School State Champions, the Haring Tournament of Girls State Champions that's sponsored by the Schifferins. And we also have the Senior Tournament going on, some great events. Rook D8 check was played, and we're going to see that king cozy up to G6.
Yeah, and white has no time, so it's probably just mentally thrown in the towel, understanding his opponent has found a nice tactical resource, and just giving a couple checks. The king comes to g6, and, well, king is safe here. Only move, king g6. Bishop h6 walks into a checkmate after queen takes, and that's why I was saying if this rook were on g8, it would be checkmate for white. This is unfortunate to have to play this one because you just trade queens, you take this bishop here, and that's all. Because the two bishops with the passed pawn, very importantly, outclass the rook.
Oh, and we got a real nice move here by Speed of Light Andrew Hong. He just got a chance to play A3. Nice little tactic there. You can't take anything. If you take on B4, you lose the rook on C1. Actually, that is what Iris played, though, thinking that that endgame is the best opportunity here.
Yeah, because unfortunately, this pawn cannot capture an A3 without losing the bishop. A3 was a really nice move, you're right, Jennifer. And take on A3, but this is a losing endgame. And the reason why, even material on the king side, 3 pawns on 3 pawns. So what black needs to do, or wants to do, is even bring this king to B3, sacrifice the rook for the A3 pawn, and then promote your A pawn. Or you could just put your king on D5, give this king a check off the 3rd rank, and bring the black king into E4. So no matter which side of the board you play on, the rook dominates the position, and so it should be a straightforward victory for black.
Another not so straightforward victory, as she has been up against a formidably underrated opponent all game. But Martha is now getting the job done, Robert, as he's found a way to play G4 and G5 and just win a piece.
I mean, I'm going back to that moment with G4. It looks like, unfortunately, king to F7. The position was already getting better and better for white. Black's rooks are all out of sorts here. But king F7 walked into G4, attacking this rook, and then G5, hitting the rook, hitting the bishop. Thank you for the piece, and with it, the game. So Martha, she is the high rate of the two players. It's one of those games where the longer it went on, it felt like she could outplay her opponent. But all credit to her opponent for making this super difficult. Serena, right? That's such an impressive performance in the opening game, despite the result.
Rook F6 now played, and it looks like G6 is going to go, and probably black will resign pretty soon. Let's see, do we have any more close games in our 2 tournaments where the rounds are wrapping up? Senior tournaments have started a lot later, so those games are going to get wild. Probably when we come back at 3 o'clock for the second round of the Denker and the girls. But yeah, Hong is totally winning. Martha's totally winning. Harmon Sushi, we looked at that game earlier. That was the one where black won the pawn on E4. Gosh, that looks like white is trying to kick back. White is trying to kick back, Robert.
Okay, so I'm looking at the position, Harmon Sushi. Oh gosh, how many extra pawns does black have? Two? What? Yeah, 2 pawns. Yeah, it actually resigns in the spot here just because the knight is so dominated by the bishop.
Yeah.
The bishop can come over to f3 to win g4. So white was trying, you're right, trying to kick back, but unfortunately was too little today. I worked this game between Stunning Garbage, which is
Stunning Garbage,
and Electronic Music Rocks. Is this part of the tournament? I feel like, yeah, 70-10. So I don't know who these players are, but if you look at this position, Jennifer, this is the most locked up we've seen a position in a long time.
Stunning Garbage, huh? What a great name.
I'm trying to look up who that even is because what a position this is. It is Sheena Zhang is stunning. Well, it's actually Stunning Garbage because there's only one G. And there's a draw by repetition. She draws against Jonathan Peterson, Electronic Music. And that's a big upset because Jonathan Peterson, the rating is 1453 US chess rating at least. So Sheena was much higher rated.
Yeah, she's a 2200. She's a national master. So really well done in this. And it's frustrating because the knight on d4 is so beautiful, but just no way to do anything, right? Just too locked up.
Yeah, you want your king on e5, but even there, you can't make any progress because black just sort of moves back and forth. The bishop on e4, this is the problem with bishop. It's on light squares. It can't attack anything. But unfortunately for white, everything is locked up. How in the world did this happen? I guess I'm going back in time a bit here just to see.
Maybe maybe they weren't playing with en passant, Robert.
They were playing.
They disabled the en passant rule.
What I call this, Jennifer, is playing checkers on 2 different games of checkers put on the same board because they're on opposite colors here. And white tried to maneuver her knight around a bunch, and the queen went to d4. And yeah, just everything's too close here. There's nothing here that I see that is creating problems for black. And once the queens end up getting traded, it was just a locked position where it looks like it should be better for the knight because closed position, the knight hops around, but there was no more progress to make as black shuffled back and forth, and we had a draw.
Nice, nicely done. And yeah, you got to be, sometimes people get a little annoyed at coaching, teaching the rules of chess, en passant. But the thing about en passant is it's really such an important rule. I mean, there would be so many positions like this if it weren't for that rule. And instead we have this this game that has such a delicate balance of structure and dynamism, and with neither factor really outweighing or overpowering the other. And we can thank en passant that's that little rule that only comes up in reality every few games, but in terms of its impact on theory and practice, it comes up every game.
Indeed, certainly does. And sorry, refreshing my.
We've got one game left, I think, by the way, in the Denker, and that's between Brave Horse and Jake State Farm 12. And white is up 2 pawns and looks ready to convert this with a g4, g5 on the menu.
All right, so let's see. We have g4, g5, and there's nothing black can really do. You're trying to use this b pawn as an outside pass pawn. And rook e4 is a very good move, by the way. Hoping for king back to g3 because then king g5 happens. And down goes g4.
And Brave Horse is actually National Master Andrew Zhang, representing Maryland. And we have Liam Hereford of Kentucky.
And is Jake representing all the good neighbors out there because State Farm is there?
I mean, yeah, I wonder how he came up with that name.
Also, wait, his name isn't Jake, it's Liam.
Yeah, Liam Hereford.
What? Okay, well, I guess just likes the commercials. And look at this position, though, Jennifer. It's one where it's kind of a mutual Zugzwang. Because it's black's move, you're unhappy. As, well, what do?
E4, maybe? Like, just transition into a situation where we've got because after E4, I'm starting G5 again. Oh, I'm sorry, it's black's move. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it actually really doesn't change much because if king to g5, then you probably put your rook on b5 with check and bring your king back. But this is what's going to happen: is eventually e4, the king went to f4, and e4 is going to be played, and it's going to be used as a decoy because white knows that g and h with the rooks is winning for him, so he wants to trade this e4 pawn for the b3 pawn and then just win this theoretically one position.
Yeah. Potless Flower. Hello. Garen 700. Some people are marking on the ratings of the players. Don't put too much stock in them. These are not online blitz ratings. A lot of times they're only a couple games of sample size, because a lot of people don't play classical chess online, right, Robert? I mean, you see that even in for grandmasters. Sometimes the ratings are like 1900 in the rapid games. They just haven't played a lot of them.
Oh, we saw this in the Women's Speeches Championship, for instance, in the Bullet. Their players were like 1900. And you're like, wait a second, that looks a little off. They just don't play in that format online, so the ratings don't catch up. These are not their established B-Day or US chess ratings. These are purely online ratings. Well, okay, G5 check. Please take me on H5. Rook H2 checkmate would be the response. And it's a brave pawn, not a brave horse, but still going to be a winning position here for white.
Yeah, well, what a great first round, Robert. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Carissa, so I'm sorry to say that the highlight of the round for us was that lovely checkmating attack that her opponent was able to execute with the allowing queen. Bad for Carissa, but great for the viewers because it's always fun to see those early upsets.
Yeah, and Carissa, I always say this: when people suffer upsets, at some point in your chess career, you were the one who was upsetting other people. So in that way, you have experience, and you should be like, okay, it stinks to lose. Nobody's happy about a loss, but you've been on the other side of these things. They're going to happen. That's why I tell people not to look at ratings, because when the 2400s in this tournament were 2000, they beat a 2400 here and there. So it can happen. This time it happened to Carissa Yip. She lost the game. And it was a really fantastic tactical sequence by Quinn Hudson to win the contest against her.
E7 played, and yeah, this one's going to be over momentarily. But I can't wait for round two of this, because if we saw some tight matches in round one, as this tournament progresses, Robert, it's going to get really feisty.
For sure. Once you start cutting the rating gap from 600 points to 300 to 150 and so on, you're going to get upsets. You're going to get people who maybe down half a point in the standings and will need a win. And that's really interesting, Jennifer, because you really only want to focus on your game, on the moves ahead. But you're like, wait, my opponent is 2.5. Sorry, it's 3 points and I have 2.5. Wait, do I need to beat that person, or is it okay for me just to play my game? When you start thinking results, you're not playing your game of chess. Rook takes b3 here will be the nail in the coffin, because after rook takes b3, there's e8 equals queen with check. If that were not check, that would be a problem, because rook e3 check would win the queen right back with the skewer. However, it is check to the black king first.
And there it is, the victory for white, as we conclude our first round pairings in the Denker and the Haring. And let's take a look at the schedule.
Sure thing. And we see that we just concluded the Denker and the Haring. The Senior is ongoing. You can feel free to follow those games on chess.com. They will be going on for quite a long time. It's a long time control. But we will be back for the 3 p.m. start. The next round of the Denker Haring takes place then. That's 3 p.m. Eastern time. If you're elsewhere in the world, please look up the conversion, and so that you can be here with us. Jennifer, it was a fun first round. Do you have any kind of final thoughts about what we just saw and what to expect going forward?
I thought we saw some great play, saw some really great fights. And like I said, as we progress, it's going to get tighter and tighter. We're going to see more upsets, some more crazy checkmating attacks. So rejoin us at 3:00 for the U.S. Chess National Tournament of State Champions. We've got the Denker and the Haring today. And I'm Jennifer Shahadi with Grandmaster Robert Hess. I'm going to grab some lunch, Robert, and be back for round two.
Can't wait to eat. See you soon, everybody.